Welcome back to the Quiet Apothecary. Settle in wherever you are. Let your shoulders come down from around your ears, and let the light in the room grow a little softer. There is nowhere else you need to be tonight, and nothing here that asks anything of you at all. Tonight we do not walk through a single garden or linger in one shuttered shop by candlelight. Tonight we open the door on something wider than any one plot of ground. We open it on a whole, quiet countryside of plants that ordinary people once knew by name, the common healing knowledge of 500 years ago, the sort of knowledge a child often learned before ever learning letters. 100 plants gathered here, before you like 100 small candles, each one waiting patiently for its turn. We will not arrange them by where they grew, though we will always say where they were found. We will arrange them, instead, the way a household actually met them, by the trouble each one answered. The plants reached for in a fever. The plants pressed against a wound. The plants steeped for an aching belly, a winter cough, a heavy head, a restless night. The women's plants and the children's plants. The plants for the skin, for the bones, for the small miseries of the eyes and the teeth. The kitchen plants that were quietly also medicine. The free physic of the hedgerow, the costly powders from the market stall, and last of all the gentle plants, kept only to sweeten the air of a room. And with each one we will do a second, quieter thing. We will follow it a little way, as it slipped out of common memory, the way so much of this knowledge did, until a plant every household once trusted became a weed that almost nobody could name. There is no need to remember any of this. Let the names settle over you like the names of old, half-known neighbors. If you drift off before the 10th plant, or the 100th, you will have lost nothing at all, and the rest will keep until you wake. Let us begin, gently, with the plants of fever. So let us turn first to the plants a household reached for when someone took to their bed flushed and shivering, in the long centuries before a fever was anything anyone thought to measure. A fever was frightening precisely because it was common, and every home had its small store of answers. The first of them, and the one whose very name still remembers the work, was feverfew. A low, bushy plant with small daisy-like flowers and pale, feathery leaves that give off a sharp, faintly bitter scent of citrus when bruised between the fingers. It grew wherever the ground had been disturbed, along cottage walls, at the edges of paths, on the waste ground behind the barn, so that a household rarely had to plant it deliberately to have it close at hand. Its name is simply worn down from the old word for a fever driver, and that told a family most of what it needed to know. A few of the fresh leaves were chewed slowly, bitter as they were, or steeped into a plain tea, and given for the throbbing kind of headache that returned again and again through a hard-working life, and to ease a body through the worst heat of a fever. Gerard, in his great herbal, set it down as good for those who were, as he put it, giddy in the head, and country mothers folded its bitterness into honey, to coax it into a reluctant child. A few pots of it were kept close by the cottage door, where a hand could find them in the dark, and its dried flowers were scattered among the stored grain and the folded linen to keep the small insects out, so that a single plant served the aching head, the fevered child, and the well-kept larder all at once. In some districts a bruised leaf was bound over a wound as well, though it was the head that everyone loved it for. And then, slowly, it faded, as trained apothecaries took over the town, and later as powders arrived that eased a headache with no bitterness at all. The little roadside plant was left to grow unregarded, until only within living memory did those studying the old remedies turn back to feverfew and remember, with some surprise, what every cottage had once known about it. We turn now to meadow sweet, tall and creamy and sweet in the damp meadows of early summer. It rose along the wet ditches and the margins of slow streams, its froth of small cream-colored flowers scenting the whole air of a low field on a warm evening, so that it was sometimes gathered simply to strew across a floor. But the household knew it as more than a sweet smell. An infusion of its flowers and leaves was taken for fevers and for the aches that came with them, for a sore, complaining stomach, and for the dull grinding pains of the joints. And it was trusted enough that it carried the old name of meadwort, and in some counties, Queen of the Meadow. The old herbals praised it for settling both the fever and the temper of the sick, a cooling, comforting draught for a hot night. Its sweetness was so prized that it was strewn thick across the floors of the hall and the church on a feast day. And a great Queen of England is said to have loved it above every other strewing herb for her own chambers, so that the same plant cooled a fever, sweetened a room, and honored a great occasion. Brewed into the old honeyed drinks, it lent them both its scent and its gentle easing of pain. What almost no one who gathered it could have known was that the plant carried in its stems the very substance that would one day be refined, in a laboratory far from any meadow, into the small white tablet now in half the cupboards in the land. The name that laboratory later chose still keeps a faint echo of the plant's own old botanical name. Yet the meadow itself was forgotten. As the tablet became cheap and easy, the froth of cream in the wet field became just another pretty weed, and the knowledge that it and the tablet were, in a sense, the same quiet mercy slipped away almost entirely. Close beside it, along the same wet margins, grew the willow, and to the willow we turn now. Not the plant itself so much as its bark. Stripped in thin ribbons from the young branches of the white willow that leaned over every slow river and pond in the country. The bark was dried and simmered into a bitter decoction, dark and astringent, and given for fevers, for the shivering ague that returned each damp season, and for the deep ache of rheumatism in the old. It was so ordinary a remedy that it was rarely written about with any excitement, only set down again and again as a thing that worked. There is a much repeated story of an English country parson in the 1700s who noticed, reasoning by the old country logic that a cure often grew near the cause, that the willow thrived in the same wet ground that gave people their agues, and who gathered and dried the bark and reported, calmly, that it answered very well. He was, in his patient way, standing at the very beginning of the road that led to modern aspirin, though he could not have known it. Long before that parson ever walked his water meadows, the willow had served the household in humbler ways as well, its supple withies cut and woven into every basket and hurdle and creel a family owned, so that the same tree that eased the fever also made the basket the herbs were carried home in. Its bitter bark was chewed too, by those who could not sleep for the ache of a tooth or a swollen joint. The willow by the water is still there, in every county, leaning over its own reflection. What has gone is the memory that a household once knew to walk down to it with a knife when the fever came. Let us turn now to centaury, small and pink and easy to overlook among the summer grass. It stood only a hand or two high on the dry banks and open pastures, its little star-shaped flowers opening pink in the full sun and closing again as the day cooled, so that a gatherer learned to go for it in the bright middle of the morning. It was, above almost all others, the great bitter of the fever cupboard. The whole flowering plant was dried and steeped, and the resulting draught was as bitter as anything a household kept, taken to break a fever, to rouse a sluggish appetite in someone recovering slowly, and to strengthen a weak and complaining stomach. The old writers called it the gall of the earth for its bitterness, and tied it, by a pretty legend, to the wise centaur of the old stories, who was said to have healed himself with it. In the medieval leech books it appears steadily, a plain and trusted thing. It was gathered in the bright middle of the day, when its flowers stood open, dried in small bundles, and kept for the whole year, as one of the surest of the bitter tonics, given not only to break a fever but to clear a yellowed, jaundiced look from the skin, and to settle a stomach turned by bad food. A wash of it was used, besides, on slow-healing sores, so that a single little pink flower of the dry bank quietly served 3 or 4 of the household's commonest troubles. And yet bitterness, which was once taken as the very proof that a medicine was working, slowly fell out of favor as sweeter, gentler preparations came into fashion, and the little pink star of the dry bank, once gathered by the armful, became a plant that even keen country walkers now pass without a second glance. We turn now to tansy, tall and strong-smelling, its flat heads of hard yellow buttons standing along the lane like rows of small brass coins. It grew readily on any rough ground, at the field edge and the roadside, and its scent was so sharp and camphorous that a bruised leaf could clear the head on its own. The household used it carefully, always in small amounts, for fevers and agues, for expelling the worms that so often troubled children, and folded into the little cakes and puddings once eaten at Easter, as a bitter spring tonic to cleanse a body grown heavy on winter fare. Those bitter tansy cakes were once so common a part of the year that whole recipes for them survive, and to eat one was as much a marker of the season as any feast. Beyond the table it was strewn across the floor, and rubbed on raw meat to keep the flies away, and laid among stored linen, and even in the beds against fleas, its sharp camphorous scent doing the work that no gentler kitchen herb could, so that tansy was as much a guardian of the house as a medicine for the body. A sprig was sometimes tucked into a winding sheet as well, to sweeten and to preserve. But tansy was always a plant to be respected, strong enough to do harm in a careless dose, and as households grew warier of anything that could not be measured exactly, and as the old spring customs fell quiet, the tansy pudding vanished from the table. The plant kept growing at the roadside, as strong-scented and as golden as ever, but the careful knowledge of how much to use, and for what, went with the grandmothers who had held it, and so to vervain, slender and unassuming, with tiny pale lilac flowers spaced far apart up its wiry stems. It grew on dry banks and along dusty waysides, a plant so plain that a passer-by might never notice it, and yet for centuries it was held in a regard out of all proportion to its modest appearance. An infusion of the whole herb was taken for fevers and for nervous headaches, as a gentle calmer of frayed nerves. and it was gathered as much for the charm as for the cure, wrapped and worn against fevers and hung in the house for protection. The Romans had called it a holy plant and swept their altars with it, and the country people who came long after kept a shadow of that reverence, gathering it with quiet words at particular hours. Beyond the fever and the frayed nerves, its cooled infusion was used as a wash for sore and inflamed eyes, and as a gargle for an ulcerated mouth, and the bruised leaf was bound to a wound or a bruise, so that for all its plain and wiry look it was a plant of many quiet services. Nursing mothers were given it too, in the belief that it helped their milk to flow freely. It was, in its way, one of the last plants where the medicine and the blessing had not yet fully parted company. And that was, in the end, part of why it faded. As the spoken charm came to be seen as mere superstition and was scolded out of respectable practice, the plant that had carried the charm was quietly set aside along with it, and vervain slipped from a herb of real standing to a wayside weed with a half-remembered air of old magic about it. To close the fever plants, let us turn to Herb Bennet, which the old books also called wood avens or blessed herb, a low woodland plant with small yellow flowers, and more to the point, a root that smelled unmistakably of cloves when it was lifted and scrubbed. It grew in the shade of hedges and at the edges of woods, in the damp leaf, mood where little else of use would grow, and it was the root that the household prized. Dried and hung in the linen press, it kept the moths away and lent a faint spice to the folded cloth, and steeped into a decoction, it was given for fevers and agues, for a loose and troubled stomach, and as a general strengthener after illness. Its very name, blessed herb, came from an old belief that a plant which smelled so sweetly of cloves and grew in the shape it did must surely turn aside evil and disease. And a sprig was sometimes hung over the door for exactly that reason. Here the doctrine that a plant's appearance revealed its purpose worked in the herb's favor, and it kept a steady, humble place in cottage and cloister alike for centuries. Then the true cloves of the spice trade grew cheaper on the market stall, and the little clove-scented root that a person could dig for nothing lost its quiet advantage, until the blessed herb of the hedge bottom became simply avens, a plant that gardeners now pull up as a weed, without ever once thinking to smell its root. Let us turn now, gently, from the plants of fever to the plants a household kept for a wound, for the everyday cuts and burns and knocks of a life lived close to blades, beasts, and open fires. Where the fever plants were mostly steeped and drunk, these were more often crushed, bruised, and laid directly against the hurt. We begin, as the old soldiers and shepherds did, with yarrow, its flat white heads of tiny flowers standing on every dry bank and field edge in the land, above soft, finely divided leaves that gave the plant its country name of milfoil, the thousand-leaf. It grew so commonly along every path that a person was never far from it, which was precisely the point, for yarrow was the great stauncher of blood. The soft leaves were crushed and packed straight into a bleeding cut, and they slowed the flow and helped the edges knit so reliably that the plant carried the names soldier's woundwort and staunchweed, and a battlefield legend tying it to the hero Achilles besides. Gerard and the old herbal set it down without hesitation for every kind of wound, and a countryman going out to a day of scythes and billhooks might carry a little of it as naturally as he carried his whetstone. It was, for a very long time, simply what you reached for when someone was cut, and then the reaching stopped. As clean boiled bandages, and later the chemist's antiseptics, took over the dressing of wounds, the crushed leaf pressed to a cut came to seem unclean and old-fashioned, and yarrow, still standing white on every bank, became a plant most people now step over on a walk without any notion that it once closed the wounds of half a continent. We turn now to the plant that wore the work in its very name, the woundwort, its spikes of dull reddish-purple flowers rising from among the nettles in the damp ditch and the shaded hedge bottom. It was a coarse, faintly unpleasant-smelling plant, easy to pass by, growing in exactly the neglected wet corners a tidy gardener would clear. But the old herbals knew it well. Jard tells, with evident satisfaction, of a labourer who badly cut himself with a scythe and cured the wound himself with the bruised leaves of this plant, against the advice of those who wished to fetch a surgeon, and healed clean and quickly. The crushed leaves were bound over cuts and slow ulcers, and an ointment made from them was kept for the same, a plain and dependable dressing for the hurts of field work. It asked nothing and grew everywhere its help might be needed. Yet a plant whose whole reputation lived in the crushed leaf, and the country ointment had little to offer once wound care moved indoors and into the hands of the trained, and the hedge woundwort, its purpose written plainly in its name, became one of the many nameless things that green a wet ditch in June, its old office entirely forgotten. Beside it we may set self-heal, low and creeping and stubbornly common, its short spikes of violet flowers dotting every lawn, meadow, and trodden path from midsummer on. It was so ordinary that no one thought to protect or cultivate it, and yet its very name, self-heal, along with its other old title of heal-all, tells how the household regarded it. The crushed leaves were laid on cuts, and a mild infusion was used as a wash and gargle for a sore mouth or throat, and for wounds that were slow to close. The old writers held, following the doctrine that a plant showed its use in its shape, that the hooded flower resembled a bill-hook or a throat, and so must be meant for the hurts of harvest, and the ailments of the throat, and country people trusted it accordingly. It was among the very first plants a child might be shown and told, "This one is good for a cut." And it is perhaps because it was so humble and so common that it fell so completely from memory. A plant that is everywhere and asks for nothing is easily taken for a weed, and self-heal, once pressed to 1,000 small hurts, is now mown flat in 1,000 gardens by people who have never heard its name. Let us turn now to Sinew, a quieter dweller of the shady wood, its neat rosettes of glossy, hand-shaped leaves spreading across the leaf mood beneath old beeches, with small greenish-white flowers held above them. It kept to the dim, moist floor of established woodland, and so it was never quite as universal as the wayside plants, but where it grew it was gathered with real respect. The whole plant was made into an infusion and taken for inward wounds and bleeding. For a plant so trusted in the healing of hidden hurts that an old saying ran roughly, that one who kept Sinew had no need of a surgeon. Bruised and applied without, it served the same office as woundwort for outward cuts. Its very name comes from the old word for healing, and the medieval leech books pair it again and again with self-heal and bugle in the ointments they call the wound drinks. Being a plant of the deep wood, it depended on a countryside where such woods were common and freely walked. And as the old woodland was felled or fenced, and as the notion of curing an inward wound with a wood herb gave way to the surgeon's craft, sanicle retreated with its shade, a plant now known only to a few who walk the oldest woods and happen to carry its name with them. We turn now to boogle, low and carpeting and faintly blue, running in dense mats across the damp meadow and the woodland ride, its short spikes of deep blue flowers rising among bronze-tinged leaves in late spring. It liked the moist, half-shaded ground and spread by runners into wide patches, easy to gather by the handful. Boogle was the constant companion of self-heal and sanicle in the old wound salves. So much so that a country rhyme advised that the person who had biggle and sanicle by them would have small need to trouble a surgeon. The leaves were bruised for cuts and bruises, and an infusion was taken for inward hurts and for the bruising and staunching of blood. Culpeper, writing plainly for the poor, recommended keeping a wound ointment of boogle, sanicle, and self-heal always ready in the house, a small standing pharmacy of 3 common meadow plants. And here again the very commonness that made it useful hastened its forgetting. When the household wound salve gave way to the shop-bought tin and the trained dresser, the 3 quiet plants of the wet meadow lost their old partnership all at once, and biggle, still spreading its blue mats each spring exactly where it always did, became a thing admired for its color by people with no idea it was ever anything more. And so to a plant whose bright yellow flowers seemed to hold the summer sun itself, St. John's wort, standing knee-high on the dry bank and the sunny wayside, its 5-petaled flowers scattered with tiny dark dots and its leaves, held up to the light, pierced with what looked like countless little windows. It flowered around midsummer, at the feast that gave it its name, and country custom held that its flowers, gathered on that one bright day and steeped in oil until the oil turned deep blood red, made the finest of all wound oils. That red oil was rubbed into cuts, burns, bruises, and the deep ache of a strained back or a hurt nerve, and it genuinely soothed them. The old people believed the little perforations in the leaf and the way the flower blood red, when crushed, were signs set there to show its power over wounds and over the darkness of the mind. For it was given, too, to lift a heavy and fearful spirit, and hung in the house to turn aside gloom and ill. That last use, the lifting of a low mood, was set aside for centuries as mere old belief, and the plant with it, until, once again within living memory, those studying the old remedies turned back to the red oil of midsummer, and found the country people had noticed something real. But by then the household that once gathered it on the longest day had long forgotten to. To close the wound plants, let us turn to plantain, the plainest and most trodden of them all, which the old English tongue called waybread, the bread of the wayside. It is the flat rosette of ribbed oval leaves that grows in every path, every trodden gateway, every crack in the yard, sending up its slender green spikes to be crushed underfoot 100 times a day. Precisely because it grew where feet went, it was always there when feet or hands were hurt, and the household reached for it without thinking. The leaves were crushed and laid on cuts, stings, blisters, and the sores of long walking, drawing out heat and helping the skin to close. So trusted of first aid that it appears in the very oldest English medicine we have, named among the 9 sacred herbs of an Anglo-Saxon charm as the mother of worts, the one that opens from the east and is good against poison and infection. A leaf snatched from the path and pressed to a bee sting was, until quite recently, a thing many country children were still taught. And yet even that last thread has nearly worn through. As the countryside emptied of people who walked its paths daily, and as the smallest hurt came to mean a trip to the cabinet or the chemist, the humble waybread underfoot, older in our medicine than almost anything else that grows, became the very definition of a weed, pulled from the lawn by people who would never guess it was once thought sacred. Let us turn now from the wound plants to the plants of the belly, for of all the complaints that came to a household door, a troubled stomach was the commonest of all. A body that had eaten badly, or too little, or food long past its best, was the ordinary condition of a great many people through a great many winters, and the plants gathered here were the ones that eased the gripe, settled the gut, and coaxed a failing appetite back to life. We begin with wormwood, silver grey and intensely bitter, its finely cut leaves catching the light like something dusted with ash. It grew on waste ground, along old walls, and at the dry edges of the yard, asking for nothing and thriving where little else would. And a person who brushed against it carried its sharp scent on their sleeve for the rest of the day. Its name says plainly what it was first for, since a careful, small dose of the bitter infusion was the old answer to the worms that troubled so many. But its greater use was for the stomach itself, taken in tiny amounts to rouse an appetite, settle a queasy gut, and strengthen a weak digestion. It was so byword bitter that the very word passed into common speech for anything hard to swallow in life, and the old herbals warned, in the same breath as they praised it, that a little did good and much did harm. From its bitterness came the flavouring of certain old wines and cordials, and the very name of one of them still carries the plant's German name folded inside it. Strewn among books and woolens, it kept the moth and the bookworm away, and laid in a chest or steeped in ale, it guarded a household's stores through the year, so that the same fierce bitterness that roused a failing appetite also stood watch over the linen press and the grain bin. A sprig laid in the dog's bedding was even used to drive away its fleas. And that, in the end, is nearly all that is left of it, as sweet medicines drove out bitter ones, and as people came to fear a plant that could harm in excess, wormwood slipped from the stomach cupboard of every house to a curiosity in a bottle behind a bar, its patient old work of settling the belly almost entirely forgotten. We turn now to mint, and to the common garden mint, the spearmint that grew in a damp, shaded corner of very nearly every plot in the land. Once it had a foothold, it spread by its running roots into a thick green patch, so that the trouble was never getting it to grow, but keeping it from taking the whole bed, and its clean, sharp scent rose the moment a skirt or a boot brushed against it. The household knew it first and best for the stomach. A simple infusion of the fresh or dried leaves was taken for a sore or heavy stomach, for nausea, for the wind and griping that followed a poor meal, and to sweeten a stale breath. And the old writers set it down warmly as a plant that comforted and strengthened the belly above most others. It was rubbed inside a new milk pail to keep the milk from turning, and strewn where a sweet scent was wanted. A poultice of the warmed leaves was laid on a sore and swollen breast and on the sting of a bee. Its infusion was used as a wash for a sore mouth and a rinse for the teeth, and a few sprigs were dropped into the wash water and the store cupboard to sweeten them, so that the commonest herb in the garden quietly served a dozen small turns about the house. Chewed fresh, it was the plainest sweetener of a stale breath long before any powder was sold for the purpose. Of all the plants of this evening, mint is among the very few whose knowledge did not so much vanish as narrow. It kept its place on the table, folded into a sauce for the Sunday meat, and in that gentle survival its older and graver character was quietly lost until the plant that was once reached for as a serious medicine for the gut became, to most, no more than a pleasant flavor for a lamb dinner and a cup of after-supper tea. Let us turn now to fennel, tall and feathery and sweet with the scent of aniseed, standing head-high on warm banks, and along the sunny edges of the garden with its haze of soft green threads and its flat gold heads of tiny flowers. It liked the dry, sunlit ground and, once settled, returned year after year, and both the feathery leaf and the ripe seed were gathered. The seeds, chewed slowly or steeped into a warm infusion, were the household's steady answer to wind, colic, and the gripes, gentle enough to give to an infant and pleasant enough that no one minded taking them, and they were carried to long church services to be chewed against a rumbling, fasting stomach. The old belief held, too, that fennel cleared and strengthened the sight, and country people repeated that serpents ate it to brighten their own eyes and slow their skins, so that a wash of fennel water was kept for tired and dim eyes. It was among the 9 sacred herbs of the old Saxon charm, a plant of real standing. Its stalks and seeds were laid beneath the loaves in the baking oven to lend them scent, and the whole plant was hung above the door on certain summer nights to turn aside ill and to keep the witches from the threshold, a use so widespread that it appears in the old rhymes alongside St. John's wort. A stouter draught of the seed was given, too, to a nursing mother to bring on her milk. Its gentle work on an infant's colic survived longest, folded quietly into the bottled gripe waters of a later age, but the seed chewed in the pew, and the fennel water kept for the eyes, and the plant's whole old character as a serious physic, faded from memory as surely as the church Latin it was once chewed against. We turn now to dill, fennel's smaller and softer cousin, its fine blue-green threads and flat yellow heads standing in the sunny garden bed, delicate and quick to run to seed. It was grown chiefly for those seeds, gathered as they ripened and dried for the winter store, and its very name carries its purpose within it, coming from an old word meaning to lull or to soothe. That is what it did. A weak, warm infusion of the seeds was the trusted remedy for an infant's colic and wind, for the hiccups, and for a restless, wakeful child, given in small spoonfuls to soothe a hard night, and it was gentle enough that mothers reached for it, without a moment's worry. The old writers half in earnest set dill among the plants that turned aside witchcraft as well, noting that the same herb the magicians used, the good housewife used against them. Like fennel, dill left its longest shadow in the bottle of gripe water that soothed later generations of babies. But the mother who once dried her own dill seed in a paper twist against the coming winter, and knew exactly how weak to make the draught for a newborn, gave way to the mother who bought a bottle without ever knowing what quiet green plant had first taught the cure. Let us turn now to gentian and to its great bitter root, For if wormwood was the bitter of the waste ground, gentian was the bitter of the high meadow. Its tall stems hung with halls of clear yellow flowers on the mountain pastures, and its lesser blue-flowered cousins scattered smaller across the chalk downs at home. It was chiefly the thick root that was prized, dug and dried and simmered into a dark, astringent, mouth-puckering decoction. And there was no more trusted tonic in all the old physic for a failing appetite and a feeble stomach. It was given to those recovering slowly from illness, to the elderly grown thin and indifferent to food, and for fevers and the general want of strength, and its bitterness was taken as the very sign of its power. The old books tell that it took its name from an ancient king of Illyria, who first found its worth. A small thread of story wound around a very practical root. The dried root was sliced thin and kept in the store cupboard for the whole year, and a small piece of it chewed slowly before a meal was the old way to wake a dull appetite, while a stronger decoction was given against the worms and the lingering weakness of a long fever, so that this one bitter root stood in for a whole shelf of tonics in a poor house. Steeped in ale or wine, it made a homely bitter drink taken as much for health as for pleasure. The bitter tonic root held on, in truth, longer than most, kept alive in the recipes for the stomach bitters that flavored a later age. But the plant itself, the clear yellow stars on the mountain, and the small blue fellwort on the down, became a stranger, its root known now only as a name on a bottle to people who have never once seen it flower. We turn now to agrimony, its slender spikes of small yellow flowers rising along the dry hedge bank and the sunny wayside, and its little hooked seeds that caught in a walker's stockings and travelled the lane on the hem of a passing coat. It grew freely on any rough, dry ground, and the whole flowering herb was gathered and dried for a clear, pleasant, faintly apricot-scented tea. That tea was the household's tonic for the liver and for a sluggish, jaundiced constitution, a spring cleanser taken to clear the blood after the heavy fare of winter, and the same infusion, cooled, made a gargle for a sore throat and a wash for wounds, so that agrimony went into the old battlefield wound waters as well. It was one of the sacred 9 of the Saxon leechdom, and an old charm held that laid beneath a sleeper's head it would hold them fast asleep until it was taken away again. The pleasant everyday tonic tea, drunk simply because it did a body good, was one of the first things to go when tea itself came cheap from across the sea, and every cottage brewed the leaf from China instead, and the yellow spikes of agrimony, once dried by the armful for the winter, became a wayside plant that catches only at the stockings now, and no longer at the memory. To close the plants of the belly, let us turn to tormentil, small and low and easily missed. Its bright yellow flowers scattered across the short turf of the heath, the moor, and the poor upland pasture. Alone among its many cousins it opens a flower of 4 petals rather than 5, a small mark by which the knowing gathered it, and it was never the flower they wanted but the root, a thin red knuckle of a thing hidden in the peaty ground. That root, dug and dried and boiled into a dark red decoction, was the great binder of the old physic, the trusted answer to the flux, to the loose and bloody gripings that emptied and killed in an age with no clean water and no other cure, given again and again through every outbreak of the summer sickness. Its name comes straight from the torment of those griping pains it eased. In the treeless islands of the north, where no oak grew for the purpose. The same red root was dug in great quantity to tan the fishermen's nets and leather, so useful that laws were passed to slow its digging, as clean water and better sanitation slowly took the terror out of the flux. The little four-petaled flower of the moor lost the urgency that had kept it in every memory, and the red root that once stood between a household and the summer sickness became a thing known now to almost no one but the few who still walk the high moors and carry its name. Let us turn now from the belly to the chest, and to the plants a household kept against the coughs, the wheezing, and the tight, rattling breath that came with every cold and wet season. In an age of smoky hearths, damp walls, and long winters, a bad chest was the companion of nearly every year, and these were the plants that loosened it, warmed it, and eased the long nights of coughing. We begin with elecampane, tall and stately, its great ragged yellow flowers standing well above head height in the damp meadow, and along the moist roadside, above broad leaves, soft as flannel underneath. It was grown deliberately in many a garden for the sake of its huge root, which was dug in autumn, and few roots were held in higher regard for the chest. Sliced and slowly simmered into a syrup, or candied into sweet, aromatic lozenges with sugar and honey, it was given for old stubborn coughs, for wheezing and shortness of breath, and for the weak chest that never quite cleared through the winter. And those candied slices were sold openly at fairs and by apothecaries as a pleasant sweetmeat that happened also to be a medicine. Its old names, horseheel and elfwort, hint at how far back its use ran, and one pretty legend had the plant spring up where Helen of Troy let fall her tears. The great root served the farm as well as the family, for it was dug and given to horses and sheep against their coughs and their skin troubles, which is how it came by the name horseheel, and a piece of it was carried against the elf shot and the unseen ills that country people feared for their beasts. Steeped in wine, it made a warming cordial for a cold and heavy chest. The candied root outlived most of its kin, a comfort both nice to eat and good for the chest, but as bought cough sweets and syrups filled the chemist's shelves, the household stopped digging and candying its own elecampane, and the tall yellow flower of the wet meadow became a striking stranger in the border, its great root left quietly in the ground. We turn now to hyssop, a low, neat, bushy plant hung with spikes of deep blue flowers, warm-scented and loud with bees, that grew on the dry, sunny bank and in the ordered beds of the kitchen and close to garden. It kept its leaves half through a mild winter and gave up a clean, slightly bitter, aromatic scent when brushed, and it was gathered for the chest above all. A syrup of hyssop flowers boiled with honey was the old and trusted remedy for a cough, a cold, and a tight, congested chest, loosening the breath and warming the lungs, and a simple infusion served for a sore throat and a heavy head. The plant carried, too, an ancient air of cleansing and purification from its long place in Scripture, where it was the herb of ritual washing, so that to take hyssop was to feel oneself made clean within, as well as eased. It kept a steady place in the monastery infirmary and the manor stillroom for centuries. But hyssop's cleansing character came to seem a matter of old religion rather than medicine, and its honeyed cough syrup was undersold by the chemist's bottle. And so the busy blue bee plant slid gently from the physic bed to the ornamental border, kept now for its color and its bees by gardeners who never think to boil it into a syrup at all. Let us turn now to horehound, and to the white horehound in particular, a grey and woolly plant, softly downy all over, that grew on the dry waste ground, the chalky bank, and the rubble at the foot of an old wall. It was homely and easily overlooked, a dusty-looking thing among brighter herbs, but for the chest it was one of the surest remedies the household had. The bitter leaves were boiled with sugar or honey into horehound candy and horehound oil, and steeped into a syrup, and given for coughs, for a wheezing and clogged chest, and for the hard old cough of winter that would not shift, cutting the phlegm and easing the breath. Its use ran back to the very oldest medicine, and the ancient physicians had counted it among their most valued herbs for the lungs. Horehound candy and horehound beer survived, dark and bittersweet, into quite recent memory, sold in twists of paper and remembered fondly by many an old person even now. And it is that very nearness that makes its fading sad, for the sweet is all but gone from the shops within a single lifetime, and the grey woolly plant that made it grows unregarded on the same waste ground it always did, its old work half remembered and no longer done. We turn now to coltsfoot, the brave first flower of the cold spring, whose bright yellow blooms open on bare scaly stalks along the raw clay bank and the trodden wayside, while the wind is still hard, long before its own broad, hoof-shaped leaves appear. That odd habit, the flower coming and going before the leaf, gave it an old name meaning the son before the father, and its hoof-marked leaf gave it the name of coltsfoot itself. For the chest it was among the first plants anyone reached for. The leaves and flowers were made into a syrup and a tea for coughs and hoarseness, and the dried leaf was the chief herb of the old herbal smoking mixtures, drawn into the chest to ease a wheeze, so that its painted flower once hung as the very sign above an apothecary's door in Paris. It was gentle, common, and everywhere. Its bright flowers were among the very first that the bees found in the cold opening of the year, and children gathered the downy seed heads, and the soft white felt scraped from the underside of the leaves, drying it for a tinder that caught a spark more readily than almost anything else, so that the same plant which eased a wheeze also helped light the morning fire. A syrup of it sweetened with honey was kept ready on the shelf through the whole of the winter. Two things carried it out of the cupboard. The old habit of smoking a herb to soothe the lungs came to seem the opposite of wise, and later knowledge found in the plant something best, not taken freely, and so, told plainly and calmly as history, coltsfoot passed from the first remedy of spring to a plant, now left respectfully alone, its cheerful early flower brightening the same bare banks with no one gathering it. Let us turn now to licorice, and to its long sweet root, a plant that had to be coaxed with real care in the deep, rich, sandy soils of only a few favoured places, and grown as a proper crop rather than gathered wild. Where it thrived, above all around one Yorkshire town whose name became a byword for it, the deep roots were dug after several years' growth and pressed and boiled into a dark, sweet, soothing juice. That juice, and the chewed root itself, was the household's great comfort for a cough, a sore or tickling throat, and a dry, hard chest, coating and soothing the raw places and quieting the cough. And it was pressed into the little dark cakes stamped with a castle seal that the monks of that town were long remembered for. Sweet as it was, It was always understood first as a medicine, and only second as a treat. And that is exactly the turn its story took. As sugar grew cheap, licorice slid almost wholly over into the world of sweets, its dark laces and pastilles filling the confectioner's jar, until the deep soothing root that a household once boiled for a raw winter throat became, to nearly everyone, simply a flavor of sweet that some love and some cannot abide, its old chest medicine hidden in plain and sugary sight. We turn now to lungwort, low and spreading in the damp shade of the old wood and the shadier corner of the garden, its leaves broad and rough and curiously spotted with pale blotches, and its flowers opening pink and turning blue upon the same stem, so that one plant seemed to bear two colors at once. It was those spotted leaves that made its name and its reputation, for by the old doctrine that a plant revealed its use in its very shape, leaves marked like a diseased lung must surely be the cure for diseased lungs. And so lungwort was gathered and steeped and given for coughs, for wheezing, and for the wasting chest complaints that so often ended a life, a mild and soothing infusion that did, in its gentle way, some real good to a raw throat and chest. The same reasoning gave the very name of the spotted tree lichen, which country people gathered and used for the chest in just the same manner. When the whole doctrine of signatures came to be seen as a charming error rather than a guide, lungwort was set aside almost with embarrassment, dismissed along with the idea that had recommended it, and the spotted leaf that a household once trusted for a failing chest became a quiet flower for a shady corner, kept for its two-colored blossom and no longer for its lungs. To close the plants of the chest, let us turn to mullein, unmistakable and tall, its single grey woolly spike of soft yellow flowers, rising straight as a candle from a broad rosette of leaves thick and pale as felt, standing on the dry bank, the roadside, and the sunny waste ground. Everything about it seemed made for use. The soft leaves and flowers were boiled into a tea for coughs, hoarseness, and a tight chest, and drawn in the old smoking mixtures like coltsfoot, and the yellow flowers steeped in warm oil made a gentle remedy long dropped into an aching ear. The tall dried stalk, dipped in tallow, made a slow burning torch that lit a funeral or a poacher's path, giving the plant its country names of hag's taper and the candle of the Lord. It was a whole small pharmacy and lamp shop, standing in a single striking plant. Yet its chest remedies were homely and slow, and its flower oil for the ear gave way to the doctor's care, and its tallow torch was made needless by the cheap candle and the lamp, and so mullein lost every one of its old offices at once. It stands today as tall and pale and striking as ever along the summer roadside, admired by many, gathered by almost none, a candle no one lights and a medicine no one steeps. Let us turn now from the chest to the head, and to the plants a household kept for the aching brow, the heavy and giddy head, the failing memory, and the frayed nerves of a hard life. These were among the most prized of all the herbs, for a clear and easy head was reckoned close to the seat of the whole self, and the plants gathered here were trusted, quite literally, above rubies. We begin with betony, or wood betony, its spikes of soft reddish purple flowers rising from neat rosettes along the shaded hedge bank, the open wood, and the dry heath. It was, for a very long time, the most esteemed of all the healing plants, so trusted that an old proverb told a man to sell his coat and buy betony, and another praised a person of many good qualities by saying they had as many virtues as Bitany. Its chief work was for the head. An infusion of the leaves was taken for headaches of every kind, for giddiness, for a heavy and confused mind, and to steady the nerves, and it was believed as well to guard against fearful dreams and dark thoughts, so that it was planted in churchyards and werne as a charm to turn aside despair and ill. A physician of the ancient world thought so highly of it that he wrote a whole book listing its many dozens of uses. Beyond the head, its infusion was given for a poor digestion and a troubled liver. Its leaves were laid to wounds and bruises, and its dried powder was snuffed up the nose to clear a heavy cold, so that the single grand reputation of Bitany rested on a genuinely long list of humbler daily services. Planted about a churchyard or a house, it was believed to keep away not only bad dreams but the wandering spirits that were thought to bring them. And it may be that this very breadth undid it in the end, for as medicine grew more exact and suspicious of any plant said to cure everything, Bitany's grand old reputation came to seem the very mark of an unreliable remedy, and the herb once worth a poor man's coat sank quietly to a pretty wildflower of the wood edge that scarcely anyone now gathers or even names. We turn now to rosemary, dark and evergreen and pungent, its narrow leaves and pale blue flowers filling a warm corner by the door where, the old saying went, it grew most strongly in the garden of a household where the mistress was truly master. Brought long ago from warmer lands, it was cherished at every threshold that could keep it through the winter, and it was above all the herb of memory. The leaves were steeped into a tea and distilled into a water to strengthen the brain and quicken a failing memory, rubbed on the temples for a heavy head, and burned in a sick room to sweeten and purify the air, so that branches of it were carried in the courts against gall fever and laid on the coffin at a funeral and given at weddings alike, always as the sign of remembrance. There is rosemary, one grieving girl says in an old play, that is for remembrance. Sprigs of it were dipped in scented water and passed to the wedding guests, laid upon the coffin and dropped into the open grave, and burned in the sick room and the courtroom alike, so that a single evergreen bush by the door served every great passage of a life, the marriage and the burial, the fever and the trial. A wash of it was used, besides, to darken and strengthen the hair, and its flowers were candied into a sweetmeat. Rosemary kept its place at the hearth as a herb of the kitchen and a plant of ceremony, and in doing so quietly lost its old standing as a serious medicine for the mind, though it is a curious thing, told plainly, that those who have lately studied its very scent have begun to wonder whether the old belief in it as a strengthener of memory was not, after all, resting on something real. Let us turn now to sage, grey-green and soft and aromatic, its wrinkled leaves and spikes of dusty blue flowers standing in a warm bed near the kitchen door in nearly every garden that had one. Its very name comes from the old word for safety and health, and an ancient rhyme asked, only half in jest, why a man should die who had sage growing in his garden. It was the great strengthener of the head and the memory, taken as a tea for a weary and forgetful mind, for the palsy and the shaking of age, and for long life itself. And the same infusion, cooled, made one of the very best gargles for a sore mouth, spongy gums, and an inflamed throat, so that no household with any garden at all was ever quite without it. The old writers reckoned a garden of sage the sign of a household that would live long and think clearly. Yet sage, like rosemary, was slowly drawn wholly into the kitchen, folded into the stuffing of the festival bird and the fatty meats it was thought to help digest, and in becoming a flavor it ceased to be a physic until the plant that once promised long life and a clear memory became, to nearly everyone, simply the herb that goes with the goose. Let us turn now to lavender, silver-leaved and sweetly fragrant, its slender spikes of soft violet flowers rising from low grey mounds on the warm, dry, sunny bank where the soil was poorest and the bees busiest. Brought long ago from the dry hills of the south, it was cherished in every garden that could keep it, as much for its clean, calming scent as for anything, and that scent was itself its chief medicine. The flowers were distilled into lavender water and steeped into a mild infusion, and the whole plant dried for the little bags, tucked among the folded linen and hung in a close room, for lavender was above all the herb of the aching, over full head. Its water was dabbed on the temples of one faint or giddy or worn out with a nervous headache, its scent drawn in to steady a swimming head and lift a low spirit, and it went into the strong scented vinegars and waters that people pressed to their faces against faintness and against the very air of plague. It was a plant of comfort in every sense, soothing to smell, to touch, and to take. Its dried flowers were rubbed into the floors and burned upon the coals to sweeten a close room, strewn among the linen to scent and guard it, and stitched into small bags laid beneath a sleepless head, so that lavender kept watch over a household's rest as faithfully as it eased its aching brows. A little of the flower was steeped in vinegar besides, and that sharp sweet wash was carried against faintness and the foul airs of a crowded place. And comfort was exactly what a sterner age set aside first. As the headache came to be met with a powder from the chemist, rather than a cloth wrung out in lavender water, the plant slid gently out of the medicine chest and into the linen press and the scent bottle, until lavender, once pressed to 1,000 aching brows, became to nearly everyone only a smell, pleasant and old-fashioned, that we lay among our clothes and no longer against our pain. We turn now to marjoram, and to the tender sweet marjoram in particular, a small and delicate plant with soft grey-green leaves and a warm, sweet, spicy scent, coaxed along in a sheltered, sunny bed, since it could rarely bear a hard winter out of doors. For all its gentleness, it was counted a herb of the head and the brain, a comfort and a strengthener to the nerves and the spirits. Its dried and powdered leaves were snuffed up the nose to clear a cold and stuffed head, its infusion taken for headaches, for giddiness, and for low spirits, and Gerard set it down kindly as a remedy for those given, as he put it, to overmuch sighing and grief. Its sweet scent earned it a place in the little bags of dried herbs laid among the linen and carried to freshen a close room, and in the garlands of a wedding. It was a plant half of medicine and half of comfort. But comfort herbs fared badly as medicine grew stern and exact, and sweet marjoram, so tender it was troublesome to keep, slipped from the physic bed into the cooking pot, and the scent bag alone, its old office of steadying an anxious and sighing mind quite forgotten by the cooks who now reach for it. Let us turn now to rue, blue-grey and bitter and strong, the herb of grace, planted stubbornly beside the doorstep of house after house, so that a caller's skirts brushed it on the way in. It liked a dry, sunny, poor soil and asked for little, and it was regarded with a respect that mingled medicine and protection in equal measure. Its bitter juice, taken in the most careful and sparing of doses, was the old remedy for a heavy and swimming head, for the falling sickness, and, above all, for the eyes, since it was firmly believed to sharpen and preserve the sight. And the great artists of old were said to have eaten it to keep their vision keen. It was carried against plague and poison, strewn before the judges in the courtroom to turn aside the fever of the Gauls, and woven into the little posies of protection that so many carried in a fearful age. Rue was always a plant to handle with care, for its sap could blister the skin in strong sun, and its strength could harm if taken past the smallest amount. And as the old fear of plague and poison faded, and as people grew wary of a herb that could hurt as easily as heal, the bitter blue bush of the doorstep was quietly set aside, kept now, where it is kept at all, as a curious relic of a more guarded and more hopeful age. To close the plants of the head, let us turn to cowslip, gentlest and most loved of them, its nodding clusters of deep yellow, sweetly scented flowers rising across the open meadow and the chalk down in the soft weeks of late spring. It grew once in such multitudes that whole fields turned yellow with it, and children gathered it by the apronful to make sweet-scented balls and to press it into a pale golden wine. Behind the delight lay a real medicine, for the flowers were steeped into a soothing tea for the head and the nerves, for giddiness and trembling, and, most of all, for a quiet and easy sleep, so that the plant carried the old country name of palsywort, for the shaking it was thought to calm. The cowslip wine itself, sipped of an evening, was valued as much for the gentle rest it brought as for its sweetness. Of all the plants of this evening, cowslip suffered a double forgetting. For not only did its remedies fade from memory, as gentler nerves were soothed by other means, but the meadows themselves were drained and ploughed and improved until the flower grew scarce, and a plant once so common that children wasted it in games became a rare and cherished sight, its calming wine and its sleeping tea remembered now by almost no one at all. Let us turn now, fittingly, from the plants of the aching head to the plants of the quiet mind, the herbs a household kept for a restless spirit, a sleepless night, and the weight of a low and anxious heart, in an age with little else to soften a hard day. These gentle plants were reached for at dusk, and there could be no better company for the last waking hour of our own long evening. We begin with valerian, tall and pale, its rounded heads of small blush white flowers rising above the damp meadow, the ditch side, and the shaded stream bank, sweet-scented in the flower, but strange and heavy-smelling in the root that was its real treasure. That root, dug in autumn and dried, and simmered into a decoction, was the old physic's surest calmer of the nerves and bringer of sleep, given for restlessness, for trembling and the vapours, for an overwrought and sleepless mind, and it was trusted enough to be reached for in the worst of times, much used, told calmly, to steady shaken nerves in later ages of war. Cats grew helplessly fond of its smell, and it went by the old names of all heal and setwall in the far back books. It was, in short, the herb you gave when a mind could not be quieted, and it is one of the few whose knowledge did not wholly die, but was quietly bought back, for the calming root lives on now as a capsule on a shelf, sold to the very grandchildren of those who once dug it. most of whom have never seen the pale flower nodding over the ditch and could not name the plant that steadies them. We turn now to the hop, a rampant climbing vine that flung itself over the hedgerow and up any pole it could find, its papery green cones hanging in soft clusters by late summer, sticky and bitter and aromatic to the touch. Grown in great ordered gardens for the brewing of all, to which it gave both its bitterness and its keeping, it had another and quieter use in the household. The dried cones stuffed into a small pillow were laid beneath the head of a person who could not sleep, their faint sedative scent easing them gently down into rest, a remedy so trusted that a king of England troubled in his mind was famously given a hop pillow to help him sleep. The same bitter cones made a tonic tea for a poor appetite and a sluggish stomach besides. When the hop first came to English all, it was scolded as a wicked weed that would spoil good beer, yet it won its place entirely. And in winning it, the hop became so wholly the plant of beer that its gentler office was forgotten, until the cone that once filled a sleepless person's pillow is known now to almost everyone only as the bitterness in a glass, and to almost no one as a quiet friend to sleep. Let us turn now to the wild lettuce, tall and pale and rank, quite unlike the tender lettuce of the salad bowl, standing on waste ground and rough banks with a milky juice that bled white from any broken stem or leaf. It was that bitter milk that the household prized, dried to a brown gum that carried the old name of lettuce opium, for it brought on a mild drowsiness and eased pain, and it was given for restlessness, for a nagging cough, and to help a troubled person down into sleep, a gentle and lawful comfort that country people called the poor man's opium. Even the mild garden lettuce was long believed to make one sleepy, an old notion woven into many a nursery tale of rabbits growing drowsy in a lettuce bed. It was never strong, and that was both its safety and its undoing, for as the true opiates, and later the chemist's reliable sleeping draughts, became easy to obtain, a weak and uncertain milk that had to be gathered and dried by hand seemed hardly worth the trouble, and the tall, rank lettuce of the waste ground, once dried for its drowsy gum, became a plant that even careful gardeners weed out without a thought. We turn now to chamomile, low and feathery and sweet, its small white daisies with their raised gold centers scenting the air with ripe apples wherever a foot pressed them, for it was planted not only in the bed, but in whole soft lawns and along paths meant to be walked upon. The old saying held that the more it was trodden, the faster it grew, and it was even reckoned a physician among plants, said to revive an ailing neighbor in the border, simply by growing beside it. For the household it was the gentlest of comforts. An infusion of the little flowers was taken for a sour and windy stomach, for frayed nerves, and for a restless night, mild enough for a child and pleasant enough for anyone. And the warm flowers made a soothing poultice for an ache or a swelling. Of all the plants of the quiet mind, chamomile survived the longest and most visibly, kept alive in the cup of pale tea, still drunk at bedtime by many. Yet even here the knowledge narrowed, for the sweet trodden lawn that once released its scent underfoot became a rarity, and the plant's broader old work of easing the body was forgotten behind the single surviving image of a mild tea, sipped by people who have never once walked barefoot across a bed of it. Let us turn now to lemon balm, or simply balm, a soft-leaved plant of the garden, and the bee border whose crushed leaves gave up a clean, bright scent of lemon that drew the bees to it in humming crowds, so that its very name in the old tongue meant the bee plant. It was cherished as the herb of gladness. An infusion of its leaves was taken to lift a low and melancholy spirit, to comfort the heart, to sharpen the memory, and to ease a nervous, fluttering unrest. And Gerard wrote warmly that balm made the heart merry and drove away all sadness. It went into the cordial waters that were sipped against faintness and grief, and one bold old physician claimed it the very elixir of long life, able to renew youth in the aged. It was, in short, the plant you reached for when the heart itself was heavy. Balm survived, like chamomile, as a pleasant tea and a sweet scent, and in that mild survival its grander character was lost, so that the leaf once believed to gladden the heart and lengthen life became, to most, no more than a lemony thing to rub between the fingers on a walk past the border, its old promise of cheerfulness quietly set down. We turn now to borage, bristly and blue, its rough grey-green leaves and drooping stars of the clearest sky, blue standing in the kitchen garden and spilling out onto the waste ground beyond it, each flower with a little black cone of stamens at its heart, and the whole plant cool and cucumber scented to the tongue. It seeded itself freely and came up year after year unbidden, so that it was always to hand, and it was, before all else, the herb of courage and good cheer. The flowers were floated in wine and cool tankards, and the leaves steeped into a cordial draught, and both were given to drive away melancholy, to comfort a heavy and fearful heart, and to put strength and gladness back into a person worn down by grief or long sickness. An old rhyme, carried down in the very shape of its Latin name, had the plant declare that it borage brought always joy. The ancient writers had called a wine steeped with it the drink of gladness, believed to banish sorrow outright. It was, quite simply, the plant you gave to lift a sunken spirit. Yet the notion of a flower that could mend a sad heart came to seem a pretty fancy rather than a medicine, and the cordial cup went out of fashion, and so borage slipped from the physic garden to the wild edges, kept now, where it is kept at all, as a plant for the bees, and an occasional blue flower dropped into a summer glass, its old promise to bring always joy, remembered by scarcely anyone who grows it. To close the plants of the quiet mind, let us turn to the poppy, and to two of them, the pale opium poppy that nodded, tall and blue-grey, in the cottage garden, and the scarlet field poppy that flamed across the summer corn. It was the swollen seed head, the papery capsule left when the petals fell, that the household boiled, and the resulting draught was the oldest and strongest sleep and pain easer of them all. Poppy head tea was given for a raging toothache, for a body worn out with pain, for the last hard hours of the dying, and, in some regions, and told here plainly and without judgment as history, to quiet a fretful, teething, endlessly crying infant, so that an exhausted household might sleep. The gentler scarlet field poppy served milder turns for a restless child and a sleepless night. This was a knowledge held with real fear, as well as gratitude, for all knew how easily the sleep it gave could deepen past waking, and it was that very danger that ended it. For as the strength of the poppy came to be truly understood, its household use was forbidden, and its cottage teas fell silent, until the flower that once brought the only mercy many ever had against pain became, to us, a scarlet symbol of remembrance in a field, and nothing that anyone would think to boil. Let us turn now to the women's plants, the herbs held in the keeping of the good wife and the midwife, gathered for the long particular passages of a woman's life, for the monthly courses, for the carrying and bearing of children, and for the slow recovery after. This was knowledge passed almost wholly from mother to daughter, and from midwife to apprentice, by word and by hand, rarely written down, and rarely shared with the physicians of the town. And so it is knowledge that slipped away more quietly and more completely than almost any other. Let us gather a little of it back, gently, before it goes entirely. We begin with the raspberry, and not with its fruit but with its leaf, stripped from the arching prickled canes that grew half wild in the garden corner and threaded themselves through every country hedge. The leaves were gathered green through the summer and dried carefully for the winter store, and steep they made the plainest and most trusted of all the midwife's teas, given in the last weeks of a woman's carrying to ease and strengthen her for the labor to come, and reached for so surely for this one purpose that it was known simply as the midwife's herb across a great stretch of the country. The same mild, astringent infusion, cooled, served as a gargle for a sore mouth and throat, and as a settling drink for the loose stomachs of children, so that no drop of it was ever wasted. Behind it lay generations of watching and gentle correction, an unbroken chain of women who had each learned from the pair of hands before her exactly when to begin the tea and how strong to make it. The same leaves, dried and stored, were steeped for the loose stomachs and sore throats of the whole household through the winter, and a cooled infusion made a wash for a sore and inflamed eye, and a rinse for a mouth troubled by ulcers, so that the midwife's herb was quietly a family medicine long after the birth it was chiefly kept for. The ripe fruit itself was reckoned cooling and good for a feverish thirst. When birth moved out of the cottage bedchamber and into the ordered ward, that whole quiet chain was broken almost in a single generation, and the midwife's herb, still greening every hedge, became to most people only the plant that gives the summer fruit, its long service to laboring women set down and half forgotten. We turn now to mugwort, tall and grey and unregarded, standing along every roadside, ditch, and patch of waste ground with its plain leaves dark above and silver white beneath, so that a whole verge of it seemed to turn pale when the wind lifted the foliage. It was among the very oldest of all the healing plants of the north, named the mother of herbs in an ancient charm, and counted first among the 9 sacred worts of the Saxon leechdom, and it was, above all, a woman's plant. An infusion of the leaves was the old and steady remedy for the monthly courses, taken to bring them on when they were late, and to ease the pains that came with them, and it was given as well to help forward a slow labor, and to settle the womb after. A sprig tucked into the shoe was believed to carry a walker tirelessly through a long day's journey. A use as old as the Roman roads, and a girdle of it worn at midsummer, and then burned in the fire, was thought to carry a year's ills away with it. Dried and hung in the house, it was counted a guard against lightning, fever, and the evil eye, and its leaves, white and woolly beneath, were dried for a tinder, and in some places burned in tiny amounts upon the skin in the old Eastern manner to ease a deep-seated ache. Laid under the pillow, it was believed as well to bring true and telling dreams. All of this was women's knowledge and hedge knowledge together, the very kind that the rise of the trained physician valued least and recorded least. And so it faded fastest, until the mother of herbs, still silvering every roadside verge, became one of the most thoroughly forgotten plants in all the land, a weed without even a remembered name. Let us turn now to motherwort, whose plainest use is written in its very name, a tall, dark, rather forbidding plant with spiny whorls of dull pink flowers clasping its square stems, grown in the garden and escaping readily to the waste ground beside it. It was, as the name says, the mother's herb, and its work was twofold, for the body and for the heart at once. A bitter infusion of its leaves was given to ease the womb and the monthly courses, and to steady a woman in the anxious months of carrying and the trembling weeks after childbirth, and it was valued just as highly for calming a fluttering, over-quick heart and a mind sunk in fearful low spirits, so that Culpeper wrote there was no better herb to drive melancholy vapours from the heart and to make the mind cheerful. It was, in short, the plant reached for when a mother was frightened as well as when she was ill. Yet a herb whose whole reputation lay in soothing the particular fears and pains of women, and that grew bitter and unlovely in a neglected corner, had little to recommend it to a later medicine that neither valued nor understood such troubles, and so motherwort slipped away almost entirely, its name now the only clear record that it was ever the friend and steadier of anxious mothers at all. We turn now to lady's mantle, low and softly green, its wide pleated leaves folded like a cloak of many gathers, each one holding at its centre and along its scalloped rim, on any dewy morning, a single perfect bead of silver water that seemed to have been placed there by hand. It grew in the damp meadow and the cool upland pasture, and both its beauty and its use were bound up with that held drop of dew, which the old alchemists gathered with great care, as the purest of all waters for their secret work, giving the plant one of its names. For the household it was firmly a woman's herb, its astringent infusion taken for the monthly courses to check an over-free flow, and to help restore a woman's strength after childbirth, and its leaves laid to wounds besides. Its very name honored the Virgin, to whom the cloaked leaf was likened. Like so many of the women's plants, its knowledge lived in the hands of midwives and good wives rather than in books, and slipped through the same widening gap when their craft was set aside. So that the plant that once caught the alchemist dew and steadied the new mother is admired now, where it is noticed at all, only for the pretty silver bead it still holds up to every morning, its old service quite forgotten. Let us turn now to shepherd's purse, the plainest weed imaginable, its thin stems hung with small flat seed pouches, shaped exactly like the little heart-shaped purse a shepherd once wore at his belt, giving the plant both its name and its country title of mother's heart. It grew in every trodden place, the field edge, the garden path, the cart rut, the crack in the yard, flowering in nearly every month of the year, and it was there, always underfoot, precisely when it was most needed. For its use was to staunch blood, and few plants were trusted more for the sudden dangerous bleeding that could follow a birth, or for the flooding of a woman's courses, or for a nosebleed that would not stop. The whole fresh plant bruised and steeped, and given at once. It was a first aid growing in the doorway, free for the pulling. So homely a remedy could hardly survive the coming of the chemist's reliable powders, and yet its worth was real enough that when, In a later age of war, those powders ran short. Army surgeons turned back to this trodden weed to stop their wounded bleeding, told here simply as a fact of history. That brief return aside, the little heart-shaped purse of the Wayside sank back into the ranks of the nameless weeds, its old life-saving office remembered by almost no one who treads it flat today. To close the women's plants, we come to two that the old midwives used, but that a later and better understanding has set firmly aside, and we speak of them here only as history, gently and without any counsel for the present day. The first is pennyroyal, the smallest and strongest scented of all the mints, a low creeping plant of damp trodden ground whose crushed leaves gave off a sharp, unmistakable minty smell that no one who met it forgot. It was strewn across floors and rubbed on the skin against fleas, and its very name recalls that use, and it was taken in a warm infusion for wind and colic, and for the bringing on of a woman's delayed courses. This last a use held in the midwife's keeping and spoken of only among women. It was known even then to be a plant of real power and real danger, and it is that danger, understood far more clearly now, that has quite properly ended its old employment, so that a herb once in every damp corner and every midwife's memory has become a rare and cautious curiosity, named here only to complete the record. The second, and the last of the women's plants, is birthwort, whose name, like motherwort's, tells its whole old purpose plainly. A clambering plant with oddly curved, pale flowers, grown in the physic gardens and the cloister beds rather than gathered wild. It was chosen for the birthing chamber by the very oldest reasoning of all, the doctrine that a plant's shape revealed its use, for the curve of its flower was thought to mirror the shape of the womb and the child within it, and so it was given by midwives to speed a hard labor and to expel the afterbirth. Dioscorides had named it for this work in the ancient world, and it kept its place in the midwife's craft for more than 1,000 years on the strength of that resemblance. But later study found real and serious harm hidden in the plant, and it is now set aside altogether, allowed nowhere near a remedy, and so birthwort has vanished more completely than any other herb of this evening, gone from the garden and the memory alike, remembered here only as the last quiet entry in the long, half-erased book of the women's plants. Let us turn now more lightly to the children's plants, the gentle, sweet, harmless herbs a household kept for its youngest members, for the wind and gripe of a colicky baby, the tickling cough of a small chest, and the fretful nights of teething. These were chosen above all for their mildness and their sweetness. For a remedy a child would take without a struggle was worth a great deal to a tired mother in the small hours, and many of them were made pleasant on purpose, coated in sugar or steeped in honey until the medicine and the treat became one and the same thing. We begin with caraway, its feathery leaves and flat white flower heads standing in the garden bed, grown for the small ridged brown seeds that ripened along its stems and were gathered and dried by the handful for the winter. Warm and sweet and gently soothing to the stomach, caraway seed was the steady old remedy for the wind and colic that racked so many infants, given as a very weak warm water in little spoonfuls, and coated in a hard shell of sugar. It became the caraway comfit, a sweetmeat pressed into small hands after a heavy meal to settle the stomach and sweeten the breath at once. Those little sugared seeds were so much a part of ordinary life that they appear, offered round with the fruit and wine, in the old plays and household books alike. The seed cake flavoured with caraway kept the plant on the tea table well within living memory, but as bought powders soothed the colicky baby, and the old seed cake fell from fashion, the gentle stomach medicine hidden in the caraway comfit was forgotten, and the seed that once eased a whole nursery is now a faint and old-fashioned flavour that many could no longer even name. We turn now to aniseed, sweeter still, its little grey-green seeds carrying a warm, licorice-like sweetness that children loved without any coaxing at all. Grown in the warm garden bed where the summer was long enough to ripen it, and often bought dried from the market stall where it was not, aniseed was the friendliest of the belly remedies. Its weak-warm infusion, given for an infant's wind and colic, and for a tickling cough, and thought as well to help a nursing mother's milk come freely. Coated in sugar it became the aniseed ball and the aniseed comfit, a sweet so plainly medicinal in its origin that no child ever suspected it was taking physic at all. It kept its place in the sweet shop jar longer than almost any of its kin. A dark shining ball sucked slowly on the way home from school by children who had no idea their grandmothers had first been given the same seed for a griping stomach. But even that long survival has thinned to almost nothing, and the aniseed once kept in every nursery for the wind and the cough is now only a flavour growing rarer, its gentle old work in the cradle entirely set down. Let us turn now to cumin, warm and earthy and aromatic, its slender seeds ripened in the hottest, most sheltered corner of the garden, or more often in the cooler north, bought dried from the spice seller who had it from far away. It was a plant of settled, homely virtues, its seed given in a warm infusion for the wind and gripe of children, and the colic of the belly, and bruised into a warm poultice laid against the stitch in a child's side. The old writers gave it a gentle character, in other ways too, holding that it kept doves and pigeons contentedly at home, and that a gift of it between friends or lovers was a token of faithful, settled affection. For a long age it was as familiar in the northern kitchen and nursery as caraway or aniseed, and then, quietly and almost completely, it left. As tastes changed, and the warm eastern spices fell out of northern cooking for whole centuries together, cumin all but vanished from the gardens and kitchens of the north, and with it went every memory of its gentle work on a colicky child, so that the seed which has lately returned to our tables as the scent of far-off cooking carries, for nearly everyone, no trace at all of the quiet old nursery remedy it once was. We turn now to marshmallow, soft and grey and downy, its pale pink flowers and velvety leaves rising from the damp, brackish ground of the marsh edge and the low wet meadow where the soil lay soft and moist. Everything about it was soothing for the whole plant, and above all its thick pale root was filled with a soft, slippery, healing substance that coated and calmed whatever it touched. A syrup or a weak decoction of the root was given for a raw and tickling cough, a sore throat and an irritated gut, and a piece of the soft peeled root was pressed into the hand of a teething child to gnaw, cool and yielding against the sore gums. The same mucilage made a drawing poultice for a boil or an inflamed swelling, so that its very name recalls the old word for healing. Its leaves and roots were boiled into a soft, soothing gruel fed to those whose insides were raw and sore. and the same slippery decoction served as a gentle wash for chapped and inflamed skin, and as a comfort for a scalded mouth. So that from the marsh edge came one of the mildest and most forgiving medicines a household kept. A warm handful of the boiled root was pressed, too, against an aching tooth to ease it. And here the forgetting took a strange and complete form, for the soft, sweet confection that country people once made by beating the plant's own healing root paste with sugar kept the plant's name long after it lost every trace of the plant itself, until the marshmallow we now toast on a stick, all sugar and air, and nothing of the marsh at all, remembers in its name a soothing medicine that not one child in 1,000 has ever tasted. Let us turn now to the sweet violet, low and modest and half hidden, its heart-shaped leaves and deep purple flowers tucked into the shade of the hedge bank and the cool corner of the garden, betraying themselves in early spring by their sweet, unmistakable scent long before the eye found them. Gentle and cooling and faintly sweet, the violet was a favorite for children above almost all others. The flowers were boiled with sugar into the famous syrup of violets, a beautiful deep blue-purple syrup kept in every still room, given for a child's cough and hoarseness, as a mild and gentle opener of the bowels, and simply to cool and soothe a feverish, fretful little one. And the flowers themselves were candied into sweets or scattered fresh into a salad. That syrup was so much a fixture of the household that it served as a plaything of the kitchen besides, turning red when touched by anything sharp and green, by anything alkaline, a small marvel shown to children. Yet syrup of violets, once made in every still room that had a good violet bank, slipped quietly out of use as the still room itself closed down, and the flower that once soothed the coughs of half the nursery is now only a scent for a soap and a faded flavor for an old-fashioned sweet. To close the children's plants, we turn to coriander, its lower leaves soft and rounded, and its ripe seeds round and sweetly aromatic, grown in the garden for those seeds rather than for the leaf, which the Old English nose largely mistrusted. The little pale seeds were warm and settling to the stomach, given in a gentle infusion for a child's wind and gripe, and thought to help expel the worms that so often troubled the young, and coated thickly in white sugar. They became the oldest of all the little round comfits, the sugar plum itself, a sweet that was medicine and treat in a single shining bead. The seed was old almost beyond reckoning, named in the most ancient books and likened there to the very manna of the wilderness. But the English set their faces against the fresh green leaf for centuries, and as they did, the whole plant slipped from the ordinary garden, taking with it the gentle old remedy hidden in the sugared seed, so that coriander returned to us at last, only as a modern and much argued over salad herb, its long, sweet, quiet life in the nursery forgotten by everyone who now either loves or cannot bear it. Let us turn now to the plants of the skin, the herbs a household kept for the outermost troubles, the cuts that had closed but would not heal clean, the burns and scalds of the cooking fire, the itches and rashes and weeping sores, the chapped and cracked hands of a winter of hard cold work, and the boils and swellings that rose without warning. These were the plants of the salve pot and the poultice, crushed and bruised and worked into fat and beeswax, and they were among the most used of all, for the skin was where a hard life showed itself first and most plainly. We begin with the marigold, the true pot marigold, its flat golden and orange flowers glowing along the garden path from spring until the first hard frost, opening reliably with the morning and closing again toward evening, as though it kept its own small clock. It grew easily and cheaply, and gave back a great deal, and above every other flower it was the household's healer of the skin. The bright petals were worked with rendered fat or beeswax into a soft golden salve, and spread over cuts, burns, chapped hands, and every kind of raw and angry skin, soothing and closing them, and a weak infusion of the same petals was taken for an unsettled stomach and to comfort a low spirit besides. The petals had other homely uses that kept the plant always in cultivation. Dropped into the broth pot to lend it color and a gentle warmth, and used to tint a pale winter butter and cheese a richer gold, so that a marigold bed served the kitchen and the medicine chest at once. Its very name honored the Virgin, whose gold it was said to be, and no cottage garden of any size was ever quite without it. A warm infusion of the petals was given to bring out the rash of measles and smallpox kindly, and to comfort the heart in a fever. The fresh juice was dabbed on warts and bee stings, and the dried petals were stored by the jarful to color and enrich the winter broth, when no fresh flower could be had, so that the marigold served the sickbed, the skin, and the cooking pot the whole year round. Country people read the weather in it too, for a flower that stayed shut past the morning was held to promise rain. And yet the true healing marigold has been all but pushed out of memory by its own showier cousins, the stiff, scentless bedding marigolds brought later from across the seas, which fill our borders now with color and none of the old virtue, so that a person may grow a garden full of marigolds and never once suspect that the plain golden flower their forebears kept was, above all, a medicine for the skin. We turn now to the house leek, strangest of all in where it chose to live, for it grew not in the bed at all, but rooted directly into the thatch of the roof and the mortar of the old stone wall, its thick fleshy rosettes clinging there through every draught and frost with almost no soil to feed them. It was planted up there on purpose, and for two reasons. The first was a widespread country belief that a roof grown with house leek would not be struck by lightning in a summer storm, so that the plant went by the old name of Jupiter's beard, and a great emperor of long ago is said to have ordered it set on every house in his realm. The second reason was a true and simple medicine for the cool, thick, juice-filled leaf, split open and pressed against a burn, a scald, a sting or a stubborn wart, drew out the heat and eased the pain at once, and its juice was dropped into sore and inflamed eyes. A household with house leek on its roof was never far from a cooling remedy for the commonest hurt of the hearth. Its juice was mixed with cream into a soothing salve for the sore, chapped hands of a winter's washing, dabbed on the small stings of nettles and insects, and dropped, cooled, into a hot and aching ear, so that the plain fleshy rosette overhead answered a whole handful of small daily miseries. Country people set it, too, upon a beehive and a doorstep for luck, and would not willingly pull it down for fear of the ill that might follow. But the thatched roof and the old crumbling wall have largely gone, and the plant that once lived overhead in every village has come down to earth as a curiosity in a rockery, kept for its neat rosettes by people who have never once split a leaf to cool a burn. Let us turn now to chickweed, the softest and most abundant of weeds. its low tangled mats of small pale leaves and tiny white star flowers filling every garden bed, every damp corner, every patch of bare and resting ground, almost the whole year round. It grew so freely that it was never wanted and never planted, and yet it hid a gentle and genuine virtue, for it was cool and soothing to hot and angry skin. Bruised into a poultice or simmered into a soft green ointment, chickweed was laid on itching rashes, on eczema and inflamed patches, on the heat of a swelling, and on sore and weeping places, cooling and calming them as few other plants could, and it was so mild that it could be used freely, and often without any fear at all. It earned its very name from the birds and the hens that ate it greedily, and country people gathered it for the caged linnet, and the poultry yard as readily as for the salve pot. Of all the skin plants it was perhaps the most purely useful and the least regarded, and it is fitting and a little sad that it should also be among the most completely forgotten, for the cool green ointment that once eased 1,000 itching children has gone almost entirely, and chickweed is now simply the soft weed that a gardener clears from the bed by the barrow load, without a moment's thought that it was ever a medicine at all. We turn now to burdock, huge and coarse and unmistakable, its great rhubarb-like leaves spreading along the roadside, the ditch bank, and the edge of the waste ground, and its round flower heads ripening into the hooked burrs that caught in a passing coat and a dog's rough coat alike, and travelled the lane by the hundred. It was those clinging burrs that everyone knew it by, and told here as a small aside of our own age, it was the very plant whose hooks, studied under a glass, gave one curious man the idea for the hooked and looped fastening now sewn into half the coats in the world. But the household prized the deep root, not the burr. Dug and dried and simmered into a dark decoction, burdock root was the great cleanser of the blood and the skin, the steady old remedy for eczema, for boils and stubborn sores, and for the whole run of skin troubles that were thought to spring from an impure blood, taken as a bitter tonic through the spring and reached for whenever the skin broke out. The same root, sweetened and fermented, made the old dark cordial of the country that paired it with dandelion, a drink still faintly remembered. Yet the tonic and the reason for it have gone, and burdock survives for most people only as a name on a fizzy bottle and a nuisance of burrs on a walk, its long service as the great physic of the troubled skin, almost wholly forgotten. Let us turn now to soapwort, softly pretty with its clusters of pale pink flowers, growing in the damp ground of the ditch and the stream side, and tellingly, most thickly of all around the sites of old dwellings and abandoned washing places, for it had followed people there on purpose. Its whole virtue lay in a simple and surprising fact that its leaves and roots, bruised and worked in warm water, raised a soft green lather like a mild soap, giving it the old names of fuller's herb and bouncing bet. That lather was used to wash the body and the hair, and above all to clean delicate woolen cloth, too fine for harsh soap, so that the clothworkers, the fullers, grew it deliberately by their waterside sheds. The same gentle wash was turned on the skin itself for itches, rashes, and the scaly complaints that harsher cleansers only worsened. It is one of the very few plants whose old use survives in a quiet expert corner, for those who care for the most fragile ancient textiles still reach, even now, for a wash of soapwort where no modern soap is safe. But for the ordinary household the coming of cheap, hard soap ended it entirely. And the plant that once lathered the family wash and soothed the family's skin lingers, now only as a pink-flowered garden escape, its foaming green leaves stripped of all their old meaning. We turn now to greater celandine, a rather straggling plant with soft, deeply cut, greyish leaves and small four-petaled yellow flowers, growing along the foot of old walls, on rubbly waste ground, and in the neglected corners where people had lately been. Break any part of it, and it bled at once a startling bright orange-yellow sap. And it was that vivid sap, more than anything, that fixed its uses in the old mind. By the doctrine that a plant's appearance showed its purpose, a herb bleeding so golden a juice must surely be a cure for the yellow of jaundice, and so it was given for the liver and the jaundiced complexion, while the sharp, almost caustic sap itself was dabbed, with great care, onto warts and corns to burn them away, and onto the films that dimmed a sore eye. An old belief, older than the herbals, held that the swallows gathered it to open the eyes of their blind, new-hatched young, which gave the plant its country name of swallowwort. The wort cure clung on in country memory longer than most, but the plant behind it was forgotten, and greater celandine, still bleeding its orange sap along every old wall, is now just another nameless weed to nearly everyone who passes it. To close the plants of the skin, we turn to heartsease, the little wild pansy, its small flowers marked in 3 colors of purple, yellow, and cream. Like miniatures of the great garden pansies that were later bred up from it, scattered across the cornfield edge, the fallow, and the cottage garden. It carried a whole armful of tender country names. Love in idleness and call me to you, and kiss me at the garden gate among them, for it was tangled up with love, and used in the old charms of it, the very flower whose juice, in the old play, is squeezed on sleeping eyes to make them dote. But its plainer household use was for the skin, and it was one of the best-loved remedies for the itching, crusted, weeping skin troubles of small children, the milk crust of a baby's scalp, and the scaly patches of eczema, given as a mild infusion and laid on as a wash, gentle enough for the youngest child. It was reckoned, too, a herb to ease a heart sick with love or grief, and so it healed within and without at once. Yet the wild heartsease was bred up and up into the broad, bright, faceless garden pansy, which kept all its beauty and lost every scrap of its medicine, and the small 3-colored flower of the field, once pressed to 1,000 children's sore skins, is now overlooked as a weedy little cousin of the showy bloom in the bedding tray. Let us turn now to the plants of bone and sinew. The herbs a household kept for the deeper hurts beneath the skin, the sprains and wrenches of heavy work, the bruises and black falls, the broken limbs, and the long, dull ache of stiffened joints and rheumatism that no one in an age of cold, damp houses and hard labor entirely escaped. These were plants of the poultice and the warm compress and the binding, reached for when the trouble lay in the frame of the body itself. We begin with comfrey, tall and rough and generous, its broad hairy leaves and drooping bells of dull pink and cream, rising from a thick fleshy root wherever the ground stayed damp, along the ditch, the stream, and the shaded wall. Its old country name, knitbone, was its whole reputation in a single word. The root, grated and mixed with a little water into a thick paste, was packed around a broken limb and bound, and as it dried it set hard, holding the bone as steady as a light cast while it knitted beneath, and the bruised leaves were bound over sprains, wrenches, and the deep soreness of a bad fall. So reliable was it that travelling bone setters and cottage healers alike swore by it, and a physician of the old world might grudgingly admit that a comfrey poultice matched his own careful splinting at a fraction of the trouble. It was among the surest and most valued plants a household could grow. But the setting of bones passed wholly into the hands of the surgeon and the plaster cast, and a later and more careful study counselled against taking the plant inwardly at all, told here simply as history, so that comfrey slipped from the first aid of every farm to a plant grown, now mostly for the compost heap, its old name knitbone remembered by only a few. We turn now to Solomon's seal, elegant and quiet, its tall stems arching in a single graceful curve through the shade of the old wood, and the cool border hung all along their length with pairs of small, drooping, greenish-white bells. It grew from a thick, knuckled root that bore, where each year's stem had died away, a round scar said to look like the seal of a signet ring, and the old story held that the wise King Solomon himself had set his seal upon the plant to mark its virtues, giving it both the scar's name and its reputation. That root was the household's great remedy for bruises and for broken bones, pounded into a poultice and laid on a black eye, a bruised cheek, a wrenched joint, or a fall, and Gerard wrote, drily, that there was no better thing for the bruises that women got through their own clumsiness or, as he put it, their husbands' fists. A wash of the same root was used to fade the marks of age and blemish from the face. But the bruise root of the shady wood, like so many, gave way to other remedies and other manners, and Solomon's seal is grown now purely for the cool beauty of its arching stem, admired in 1,000 shade gardens by people who would never think to dig its sealed root for a bruise. Let us turn now to the nettle, the most stinging and most useful weed of all, standing in dense green stands wherever people had lived and left the ground rich, along the wall, the midden, the ditch, and the old foundation, ready to punish the bare arm that brushed it. For all its sting, or even because of it, it was a plant of many virtues. The tender young tops of spring were boiled into a dark, iron-rich soup and pottage, the great cleansing tonic of the year that cleared the heavy blood of winter, and the same plant was brewed into a country beer. For the aching joints of rheumatism, the old remedy was a bold one, the stiff limb deliberately lashed with the fresh stinging plant. The heat and tingle it raised believed to drive out the deeper cold ache beneath, and a wash of the leaves was used to strengthen thinning hair. The tough fibres of the stem were even spun and woven into a strong cloth in times of need. Its seeds were given to put a gloss on the coats of horses and cattle. Its juice was used to curdle milk and to staunch a stubborn nosebleed. And a wash of the boiled leaves was rubbed into the scalp against falling hair, so that scarcely any part of the plant went unused about a thrifty household. Dried and cut, it was fed to the hens through the winter to keep them laying, and to the family it gave a dark green dye. Yet the spring tonic soup, the stinging cure for stiff joints, the nettle beer, and the nettle cloth have all faded together, and the nettle stands now as the very picture of a useless and unfriendly weed, its long list of homely uses forgotten by nearly everyone it still stings. We turn now to the daisy, humblest and most trodden of all the flowers, its little white and gold blooms opening with the light across every lawn, meadow, and grassy path, closing again at dusk in the habit that gave it the old name of the day's eye. A child's flower for chains and games it may be now, but the household once knew it by a plainer and more serious name, bruisewort, and used it exactly as that name suggests. The bruised leaves and flowers were made into a poultice and an ointment and laid on bruises, sprains, and the aches of a fall or a blow, and a mild infusion was taken for the same deep soreness within, so that the commonest flower underfoot was also one of the readiest remedies for the commonest hurt of a rough life. It grew conveniently in exactly the trodden places where people were most likely to slip and fall. But a remedy so homely and so freely growing could hardly hold its place against the chemist's liniment, and the daisy sank back entirely into the grass, its old office as bruisewort, so wholly forgotten that to call it a medicine at all now sounds like a small joke, though for centuries it was nothing of the kind. Let us turn now to mustard, sharp and pungent and warming, grown as a field crop and a garden herb alike, its bright yellow flowers giving way to the small round seeds, dark or pale, that held its heat locked away until they were crushed and wetted. Beyond the hot yellow paste that woke up a plate of meat, mustard was one of the household's great drawing and warming remedies for the deeper aches. The ground seed was mixed to a paste and spread on a cloth to make the mustard plaster, laid on a congested chest, a stiff back, or an aching rheumatic joint, where its fierce warmth drew the blood to the surface and eased the cold pain beneath, and a good handful stirred into a basin of hot water made the mustard footbath that met the first chill of a cold and warmed a body through. Nearly every household kept mustard for exactly these turns, and the plaster and the footbath survived, in cottage and nursery, well within living memory. And then, quite recently and almost completely, they went, leaving mustard only on the dinner table, its long career as the warming plaster of every aching chest and stiff shoulder forgotten within a single lifetime. To close the plants of bone and sinew, we turn to Angelica, tall and stately and sweetly aromatic, its great, rounded heads of tiny green-white flowers standing well above head height along the northern stream bank, and the damp meadow filling the air around it with a warm, resinous, faintly musky scent. It was reckoned the most blessed of plants, its very name recalling an angel, for an old legend told that an archangel had revealed its power against pestilence to a monk in a dream during a great plague, giving it the grand title of the root of the Holy Ghost. Every part was used. The warm root and seed were taken for a weak and windy stomach and a tired, aching, chilled body. The stems were candied bright green as a sweetmeat, and, above all, the plant went into the great cordial waters carried against plague and infection, believed to warm and defend the whole frame from within. It was protection and medicine and sweetmeat in one tall, fragrant plant. The candied green stalk, laid across a cake, was the last of its uses to survive. And even that has now nearly vanished from the baker's shelf, so that Angelica, once the blessed defender against the very worst the age could bring, is remembered by hardly anyone at all, its tall sweet heads nodding unregarded over the northern streams where it still grows wild. Let us turn now to the small miseries. The plants a household kept for the eyes and the teeth, for the sore, weeping, dust-troubled eyes of a life spent in smoke and wind, and for the toothache that, in an age with no dentist and no relief but endurance, could be among the sharpest sufferings a person ever knew. These were among the most tender and the most desperate of all the household's remedies, for the eye and the tooth allowed of no rough handling, and the plants gathered here were used with a particular care and a particular hope. We begin with eyebright, tiny and easily missed. Its small white and purple flowers, each marked with a spot of yellow at the throat, scattered low among the short grass of the poor pasture and the open heath, where it lived half hidden and half fed upon the roots of the grass around it. It was that little flower, dashed and veined, and spotted like a small bloodshot eye, that fixed its use in the old mind by the doctrine that a plant's shape declared its purpose, and so, above every other herb, eyebright was the plant of the eye. A cooled infusion of the whole flowering plant was used as a gentle wash and bath for sore, red, weak and weeping eyes, and taken inwardly, it was thought as well to clear a dull head and sharpen a failing memory. It was so tied to the eye in the common mind that a great poet could send an archangel to clear a man's clouded sight with eyebright and rue, and be understood at once. But the care of the eye passed wholly into skilled and separate hands, and eyebright, which could never be tamed into a garden plant because of its strange half-feeding on the grass, was left in its poor pastures with no one to gather it, so that the little flower once bathed onto 1,000 sore eyes is now known to almost no one, its very name a puzzle to those who happen to read it. We turn now to clary sage, larger and softer than its kitchen cousin, its great wrinkled, hairy leaves and tall spires of pale lilac and white brack standing in the warm garden bed, giving off a strong, musky, not wholly pleasant scent that clung to the fingers. Its old names, Clear Eye and See Bright, point straight to its strangest and most trusted use, for the small seeds of the plant, when dropped into a sore or dust-troubled eye, swelled at once into a soft, clear jelly that gathered up the grit and the moat, and could then be lifted gently out, carrying the trouble with it. It was a real and clever remedy for the commonest hurt of a dusty, chaff-filled working life, an eye full of grit, and it was reached for without a second thought. The same plant had a second and merrier use, steeped in wine to make it stronger and headier, so that it went by the name of muscatel sage among those who brewed with it. Yet the thought of placing a seed in the eye at all is one a later and more cautious age set aside entirely, and clary is grown now only for the scented oil pressed from it, its old office of clearing the dusty eye, so forgotten that its very names, Clear Eye and See Bright, have become a riddle. Let us turn now, gently and only as history, to henbane, a plant of real danger that the old world used, and that we rightly leave alone, named here to complete the record, and for no other purpose. It was a coarse, clammy, foul-smelling plant of the waste ground and the old wall, its dull yellow flowers veined with a network of fine purple lines, and its whole aspect somehow unwholesome, so that people learned early to know and mistrust it. And yet it was used, for it was a strong easer of pain and bringer of a heavy sleep, and its chief homely use was against the raging toothache, the sufferer leaning over the smoke of its smouldering seeds to breathe in the fumes, in the old belief that this would kill the little worm thought to gnaw within the aching tooth. Small pale threads seeming to wriggle out of the smoking seeds were shown, as the very worms driven forth, though they were nothing of the kind, and the travelling tooth drawer at the fair made a good show of it. It stood, too, among the drowsy plants of the old sleeping sponges that dulled a patient before the knife. But henbane was always a poison as much as a medicine, and its dangers, understood now with painful clarity, have ended its use altogether, so that the plant once smoked over 1,000 aching jaws is grown nowhere and reached for by no one, remembered here only as a shadow at the edge of the old physic. We turn now to pellitory of Spain, which came not from the hedgerow, but from the apothecary's drawer, a small daisy-like flower of warmer lands, whose root was imported and sold dried for one particular and unforgettable purpose. That root, chewed or held against an aching tooth, set the whole mouth tingling and burning and streaming, and in doing so it numbed the sharp pain of the tooth and drew off what the old physicians called the rheum. The flood of watering it brought being taken as the very sign of its working. It was the nearest thing the ordinary sufferer had to a true deadener of the tooth-ache, and the apothecary sold a great deal of it, alone and worked into the tinctures and washes kept for the mouth. Nothing else in the common store bit and numbed quite as it did. And a person in the grip of a bad tooth would gladly bear its fierce tingling for the blessed dulling that followed. But the coming of the dentist, and of clove oil, and the true numbing draughts of a later age, swept the tingling root aside entirely, and pellitory of Spain, once in every apothecary's drawer against the commonest agony of the age, is now a name that means nothing at all to nearly everyone, its fierce and merciful burn quite forgotten. Let us turn now to scurvigrass, a small, low, fleshy-leaved plant of the salt marsh, the sea cliff, and the cold northern shore, its little rounded leaves thick and succulent, and sharply pungent to the tongue, and its low froth of tiny white flowers appearing in the early spring. It grew where the land met the sea, and in a few places, high on the cold mountains, and it held, though no one then could have named it so, exactly the hidden virtue that a body starved of fresh green food through a long winter most desperately lacked. For the spongy, bleeding, loosening gums and the aching, failing strength of what the old world called the scurvy, no plant was surer, and it was eaten fresh, pressed for its sharp juice, and above all brewed into the scurvigrass ale that was cried through the streets of the towns, each spring and drunk as the great cleansing tonic of the year. Sailors and northern households alike leaned on it through the hungry end of winter. In the great houses it was pressed, and its sharp juice mixed with the juice of oranges and a little sugar into a spring physic that the whole family took by the spoonful. And the plant was so trusted that ships bound on long voyages sought it eagerly at every northern landfall. Though dried, it kept little of its worth, and had to be taken fresh. Bruised, it was laid as well on the fall, slow ulcers that the same want of green food brought on. But once the virtue of the lemon and the lime was understood and carried everywhere by ship, and the cause of the scurvy at last made plain, the sharp little shore plant lost its whole reason, and scurvigrass, once brewed into an ale that every spring throat knew, sank back into the salt marsh a nameless weed, its long service against the bleeding gum entirely forgotten. To close the plants of the eyes and teeth, we turn to wood sorrel, delicate and shade-loving, its thin trefoil leaves folded like a shamrock and drooping softly at dusk, spreading in cool green carpets across the floor of the old wood, among the roots of the great trees, its small white flowers veined with the faintest pink. It was sharp and clean and lemony to the taste, and that cool soreness was its whole virtue, for the leaf, chewed or steeped into a cooling drink, eased a hot, dry, feverish mouth, soothed the sore places and small ulcers of the gums, and cut the thirst of a fever, so that it was carried to the sick bed as a small green refreshment. The same sharp leaf made a green sauce for fish and meat before the sorrels and lemons of the garden, and the market took its place. Country people called it cuckoo bread, and for its habit of flowering around Easter, the Allelia plant, and children ate it idly on a walk for its pleasant soreness. Yet the sharp taste that was once its virtue is looked on more warily now, and the plant is neither gathered for the sick room nor eaten on the path as it was, so that the cool green carpet of the old wood, once a small mercy to a fevered mouth, is passed by unregarded, its name and its use alike slipped away. Let us turn now to the kitchen plants, and to one of the quiet truths at the very heart of this whole evening, that the medicine chest and the cooking pot of 500 years ago were very nearly the same shelf. The good wife who seasoned the broth and the good wife who dosed the sick were one woman, and many of the plants she reached for daily to feed her household were also, and without any sense of contradiction, among its surest medicines. These are the plants we still know best of all, for they never left our kitchens, and yet their older and graver character has slipped away almost entirely behind the flavor. We begin with garlic, the great cure-all of the poor, its pungent white clove so valued for healing that it was called, quite seriously, the poor man's treacle. Treacle being the name for the costly cure-all of the rich. It was reached for against almost everything. Its crushed cloves were laid on wounds and stings, taken for coughs and a heavy chest, given against the worms that troubled children, and hung about the house, and worn on the body against the plague, and against every kind of evil and infection, in an age that did not sharply divide the two. One old recipe in particular deserves a quiet word here, told simply as a matter of history. A remedy set down in an English leech book more than 1,000 years ago. A salve for a sore eye made of garlic and onion, wine, and oxgall left to stand in a brass vessel, was tried in a laboratory in our own time, and it did, to the surprise of those who tried it, kill a stubborn modern infection that many newer medicines could not. The old cooks who crushed the same cloves could not have known why it worked. Only that, often enough, it did. And that is the whole shape of garlic's forgetting, for it never left the kitchen, but its long life as the poor man's treacle, the ready medicine of every household too poor for any other, has faded so completely that we taste it now only as a flavor, and never as the cure it was for the greater part of human history. We turn now to the onion, garlic's milder and gentler kin, in every garden and every pot, and quietly a medicine in nearly every one. Roasted soft in the embers, and its hot center pressed against an aching ear, the onion was the old and trusted remedy for earache, one that many a grandmother still remembered within living memory, and sliced and layered with sugar or honey until it drew out a sweet syrup. It was the household's steady cure for a cough and a cold, taken by the spoonful through a wheezing winter. Its cut and roasted flesh was bound as a warm drawing poultice on a boil, or a stubborn swelling to bring it to a head, and it was counted, like garlic, a guard against infection in a sick house. It was there, always, in the lowest and plainest kitchen, medicine and food at once. Its juice was dabbed on the small burns and scalds of the cooking fire and on the sting of a wasp. A cut half of it was set on a shelf in a sick room in the belief that it drew the sickness out of the very air, and the water in which it had been boiled was given for a hard, barking cough, so that the humblest thing in the house was quietly one of its busiest healers. Rubbed on the scalp, it was even thought to bring back thinning hair, but the roasted onion in the ear and the onion syrup in the cup have faded to a faint folk memory, kept alive here and there by an old country person. And to nearly everyone the onion is now only the base of the stew, and the sting in the eye at the chopping board, its long service in the sick room forgotten. Let us turn now to the leek, oldest and most honored of the household plants, so central to the whole idea of the garden, and its healing that the very words for a garden and for a book of remedies in the Old English tongue were built upon its name. It grew easily and stood through the winter when little else did, and a strengthening pottage of leeks was fed to the weak, the recovering, and the poor as much for its virtue as for its filling. Thought to cleanse the blood, ease the chest and the cough, and mend the body from within. Its juice was dropped on wounds and taken for a heavy cold, and it was reckoned, like its cousins, a general strengthener and cleanser of the whole frame. A whole people took it for their emblem and wore it with pride, and it kept a place of honor on the plate and in the physic of the North for 1,000 years and more. And yet the leek, too, has become a vegetable and nothing else, sweet in a winter soup and forgotten as a medicine, its ancient standing at the very root of the words for garden and healing unknown to almost everyone who grows it. We turn now to parsley, the most familiar of green herbs, its bright curled or flat leaves edging the garden bed and the kitchen path in every household that kept a plot. So common that it has become the very picture of a mere garnish, a scrap of green laid beside the meat and pushed to the side of the plate. But the old household knew it as a real and valued medicine, above all for the water and the kidneys, its roots and seeds taken in a decoction for gravel and stoppage, and to move a sluggish flow, and its leaf eaten to freshen a tainted breath and settle the stomach after a heavy meal. It carried a whole cloud of country belief besides, that its seed went 9 times down to the devil and back before it would deign to come up, which was the old way of explaining how slow and uncertain it was to sprout, and that it flourished best where the woman ruled the house. Its long, serious career as a medicine of the kidneys and the blood has vanished behind its very familiarity, so that the plant a household once dug and decocted for real complaint survives, a little insultingly, as the one green thing on the plate that hardly anyone troubles to eat. Let us turn now to thyme, low and wary and intensely aromatic, its tiny leaves and haze of pale purple flowers spreading in fragrant mats across the dry sunny bank and the well-drained garden bed, humming with bees and releasing its clean, sharp, resinous scent at the lightest touch. Beneath the flavor it lent the pot lay a genuine and powerful virtue, for thyme was among the most cleansing and antiseptic of all the kitchen herbs. Its syrup, boiled with honey, given for coughs, sore throats, and a tight and heavy chest, and its infusion used as a wash for wounds and as a gargle for an infected mouth. It was believed as well to lift a heavy and fearful spirit and to keep bad dreams from a sleeper, so that it was laid among the linen and strewn where sweetness and health were wanted. The wild thyme of the bank, on which a poet laid his sleeping queen, carried the same virtues in gentler measure. A sprig of it was laid among the linen, and slipped beneath the pillow to keep away the moth, and the bad dream alike. A bath scented with it was thought to give a weary body fresh heart and courage, and its honeyed syrup was kept ready through the winter for the first tickle of a cough, so that thyme guarded a household's cloth, its sleep, and its chest all at once. Burned upon the coals, its clean sharp scent was used to fumigate and sweeten a sick room. Something of thyme's cleansing power lingers, told plainly, in one or two things we still use without knowing their source. But the syrup for the cough and the wash for the wound are forgotten, and thyme is now, to nearly everyone, only a small grey-green flavour for a roasting pan. To close the kitchen plants, we turn to savoury, and to the warm, peppery summer savoury in particular. A small, soft, bushy herb of the sunny garden bed, spicy and biting to the taste. That was grown as much for the belly as for the board. Its oldest and fondest name was the bean herb, for it was cooked with the beans and pulses that so often left a household windy and griped, and it eased exactly that trouble, its warm carminative virtue settling the stomach and easing the wind that its companions on the plate had raised. Rubbed fresh on the skin, it took the pain and swelling from a bee or wasp sting, a quick remedy for a gardener working among the hives, and it was thought, half seriously, to warm the blood and the affections besides. It was a small, homely, dependable plant in every kitchen garden and every pot of beans, but savoury, never showy and never grand, slipped from the garden as tastes narrowed, and the peppery little bean herb that once eased the wind of every pottage and cooled the sting of every hive is now among the least known of all the old kitchen herbs, its gentle work forgotten wherever it is not simply unknown. We turn now, last of the kitchen plants, to horseradish, its great coarse leaves rising from a deep, thick, pale root that held, locked within its plain flesh, a heat as fierce as any mustard, released only when the root was scraped or grated, and the air itself seemed to catch fire above it. Beyond the sharp sauce it made for the roasted meat, that fierce root was a genuine and vigorous medicine. Grated and its fumes drawn in, it cleared a blocked and heavy head and streaming sinuses at once, and made into a warm poultice, and laid on the skin it drew the blood and eased a rheumatic ache or a cold stiff joint, working much as the mustard plaster did. Taken in small amounts it roused a sluggish stomach, and was thought to help expel the worms, and a strong root was kept in many a house against the winter chills. Yet horseradish, like mustard, has been driven back entirely to the dinner table, its fierce heat now only the accompaniment to a joint of beef, and its old work of clearing the head and easing the aching joint has slipped from memory within a few short generations, so that few who wipe their streaming eyes over a plate of it guess that the streaming was once the very point. Let us turn now to the hedgerow and the wayside, and to the free physic of the country, the plants that no one had to grow or buy, because they grew of their own accord along every lane, ditch, and field edge, offering themselves to anyone with the knowledge to gather them. For the poor, who could afford no apothecary, and kept only the smallest patch of ground, these wild plants of the common way were the whole of the medicine chest, and the knowledge of them was, in a real sense, the difference between health and helplessness. It is knowledge that faded fastest of all as the hedgerows themselves were grubbed out, and the commons enclosed, and the free pharmacy of the roadside became simply scenery. We begin with the elder, which was less a single plant than a whole apothecary shop standing in the hedge, so complete in its gifts that an old saying held a household with an elder tree by the door had little need of a doctor at all. Its flat, creamy heads of sweet-scented flowers, gathered in early summer, were made into a cooling drink for fevers and feverish colds, a soothing wash for sore eyes and rough skin, and the fragrant cordial many still faintly remember, and its heavy hanging clusters of dark berries, gathered in autumn, were boiled down into a thick dark syrup that carried a household through the coughs and chills of the whole coming winter. Every part had its use: the bark, the leaf, the flower, and the fruit, and the very pith of its hollow stems was whittled by children into whistles and pipes. The inner bark was worked into an ointment for burns and a purge for the stubborn. The young leaves were beaten into a green salve for bruises and sprains, and boiled into a wash that kept the flies from a horse and a dairy, and the flowers were floated in a water that women dabbed on the skin to keep it fair and cool, so that the one tree in the hedge answered burns, bruises, flies, fevers, coughs, and the complexion together. Its berries, fermented, even gave the cottage a dark and warming wine. Yet the elder was treated with a wary respect as well, for widespread belief held a spirit lived within it, the elder mother, whose leave had to be asked aloud before a single branch was cut. All of this, the whole standing pharmacy of the hedge, has thinned to a bottle of cordial and a jar of jelly, and the elder, still frothing white in every June hedge, is passed by 1,000 times a day by people who could not name a single one of its old healing gifts. We turn now to the hawthorn, the May-tree itself, whose foaming white and faintly pink blossom turned the whole hedge to cloud in late spring, and whose small dark red haws hung heavy along the same branches by autumn. It was the very body of the hedgerow, planted mile upon mile to fence the fields, and it gave more than shelter. The young spring leaves were eaten by country children straight from the branch, a small green nibble they called bread and cheese, and the flowers and the ripe haws were steeped and taken for the failing, labouring heart of age. To steady and strengthen it, a use the old people trusted on long observation alone, and one that, told plainly, a later and more careful study came round to respecting after all. The tree was wrapped in belief as much as medicine. Its blossom thought unlucky to carry indoors, and its branches central to the old rites of May. Its hard red haws were dried and ground in years of dearth to stretch the bread flour. Its dense thorned wood made the best of walking sticks and tool handles, and a lone old thorn standing in a field was left uncut for generations for fear of the luck bound up in it, so that the tree was woven through the whole life of a place, and not through its medicine alone. The young leaf buds were pickled, besides, and eaten like a caper. But the hawthorn's quiet office, as the steadier of the aging heart, faded with the herb wives who kept it, and the May tree stands now as a hedge and a spray of spring blossom, its long service to the tired heart known to almost none who pass beneath it. Let us turn now to the dog rose, the wild rose of the hedge, its simple pale pink flowers scenting the June lane, and its scarlet hips glowing along the bare branches deep into winter, hard and bright when little else of colour remained. It was the hips, not the flowers, that the household prized, for they held, though no one then could have named the virtue, exactly what a body worn thin by a long green starved winter most needed, and they were boiled and strained and sweetened into a syrup given to children and the ailing against colds, against the bleeding gums of the cold months, and simply to put strength back into a weakened frame. The strange mossy red gall that sometimes grew on the branch, the robin's pincushion, was gathered too and used for various old complaints. This was a remedy so genuinely good that, told as recent history, it was gathered again by the sackful in a later time of scarcity and hardship, when children were sent along the hedges to bring in the hips for a syrup that kept a whole nation's little ones well. But that memory too has faded, and the hips hang now untouched for the birds, their old syrup forgotten, the hedge full of a medicine that no one gathers. We turn now to the bramble, the blackberry, most tangled and most generous of all the hedge plants, its arching thorned canes rooting where they touched and flinging themselves across every gap and gateway, offering the whole country its sweet dark fruit for the price of a few scratched hands. But long before the berries ripened, the household used the leaf and the root, both sharply astringent, steeping them into a tea for the loose bowels and the summer flux, and into a cooling gargle for a sore and inflamed throat and mouth, so that the bramble was a plain and dependable binder always to hand. It carried a great weight of old belief besides, for a sick or ruptured child was passed, in a solemn country rite, 3 times under the natural arch of a rooted bramble stem to draw off the illness, and no one gathered the berries after a certain autumn day, when the devil was said to have spoiled them. Its long tough runners were split and used to bind and mend the straw of a beehive and a thatch. Its ripe fruit was dried and stored and boiled into a cordial for winter colds, and a little of its root was simmered for a dye, so that the tangled weed of the hedge clothed, fed, bound, and physicked a household in its turn. A leaf of it, chewed soft, was even laid against a scald or a sore place in the mouth. The gargle and the binding tea are quite forgotten now, and the passing under the arch is a folklorist's curiosity, so that the bramble survives only as a giver of autumn fruit and a tearer of sleeves. Its long career as the household's binder let go entirely. Let us turn now to the dandelion, the brightest and most stubborn of all the weeds of the wayside and the trodden grass, its golden flowers opening with the sun and closing with the rain, giving way to the round grey clocks of seed that every child has blown. It was no weed to the old household, but a valued and many-sided medicine and food. Its bitter young leaves were eaten as one of the first cleansing green salads of spring. Its thick root was dug, dried, and roasted into a drink or simmered into a tonic for a sluggish liver, and the whole plant was the great mover of the water, so plainly and powerfully diuretic that its blunt country names in more than one language spoke of exactly that effect. It was the steady old cleanser of the blood, the liver, and the water, taken every spring to set the body right after winter. Its bright flowers were gathered by the basketful and fermented into a clear golden country wine. Its milky sap was dabbed on warts to fade them away, and its soft seed clock was blown by children to tell the hour and to carry a wish, so that the plant we now grudge a corner of the lawn once gave the household a salad, a tonic, a medicine, and a wine, and the children a small hour of play besides. Even its roots, dug and dried and roasted, gave a bitter drink to stretch the costly coffee. Yet all of this has vanished behind a single idea, that the dandelion is the enemy of a neat lawn, and the plant our forebears dug and dried and brewed as one of their most useful tonics is now poisoned and rooted out by the very people it once kept well, its bright and useful face reduced to a nuisance in the grass. We turn now to cleavers, the sticky scrambling weed that everyone has met, its halls of narrow leaves and its whole weak stem covered in tiny hooks that fastened it to a passing sleeve or a dog's coat, so that children flung it at one another's backs in play. It clambered through the spring hedge and the ditch, and for all its clinging nuisance, it was a valued cleanser, gathered fresh in spring and pressed or steeped into a green tonic drink, taken to clear the blood and cool an overheated system, and used as a wash and a remedy for the skin and for the sluggish, swollen glands of a run-down body. Its little round seeds, gathered and roasted, made one of the closest of all the wild substitutes for costly coffee, being of the very same family. It was a plant of the poor and the springtime, gathered where it grew for nothing. But the spring cleansing draught fell out of custom as the seasons stopped ruling the household's health, and cleavers is now only the sticky weed that fastens to a walker's trousers. Its old office as a cleanser of the blood and comforter of the glands entirely slipped away. To close the hedgerow plants, we turn to ground ivy, a low creeping plant of the shady bank and the damp wood edge, its small scalloped leaves and little blue-purple flowers running in mats across the ground and carrying a sharp, aromatic, faintly bitter scent when bruised. Its oddest and oldest name, Allahoof, remembers a use now almost impossible to imagine, for long before the hop came to England, it was ground ivy that was used to clear, flavour, and preserve the common ale of every household, steeped in the brewing tub so faithfully that the plant and the beer were named for one another. Beyond the brewing tub, it was a true medicine, its infusion, the old gill tea, taken for coughs, colds, and a heavy congested chest, and used as a wash for wounds and dropped for an aching ear, a cheap and cheerful remedy that was even cried and sold in the streets of the growing towns. It was, in short, both the brewer's herb and the poor person's cough cure. But the hop drove it wholly out of the ale, and the chemist's bottle out of the sick room, and ground ivy crept back into the shade a forgotten thing. Its name Allahoof now a riddle, and its gill tea a memory held by no one at all. Let us turn now, for the last full gathering of our evening, to the plants of the market stall, and to a different kind of knowledge and a different kind of loss. These were not the free herbs of the hedge, but the costly dried spices and drugs, carried from far-off lands, weighed out in tiny amounts by the apothecary and the spicer, and kept in the household in small precious quantities under lock and key. To an ordinary family, these were medicines first and flavors only second, dear enough that a pinch was a small event, and their forgetting is the strangest of all, for they did not vanish, but rather fell so far in price and rose so far in plenty that we can no longer imagine them as the rare and serious physic they once were. We begin with ginger, the warm and biting root, brought dried from the East, one of the most valued of all the household drugs, and one of the first that an ordinary family might actually afford. Its whole character was warming, and it was reached for against everything cold and stagnant in the body, given for a chilled and windy stomach, for nausea and a queasy gut for the cold aches of winter, and worked into the warming cordials and the spiced wines that were taken as much for health as for pleasure. It went into the honeyed cakes and the gingerbread that were themselves half medicine, warming comforts pressed on the cold and the ailing, and a king troubled by plague is said to have urged ginger on his city as a guard against it. Candied in sugar, it was kept as a sweetmeat that settled the stomach after a heavy feast. Steeped in ale and wine, it made the warming drinks carried against the winter damp. And a small piece was chewed by those about to travel a cold and sickening road, so that the same root sweetened the table, warmed the cup, and steadied the traveler. It was rubbed, too, on a chilblain to bring the warmth back into a numbed and aching foot. Of all the market spices, its medicine survived the longest and lies nearest the surface still, for many a person even now reaches by instinct for something gingery against a turning stomach, told here as a plain fact, without quite knowing they are following the oldest of instructions. Yet the deliberate, careful use of ginger as a serious warming physic has gone the way of the rest, folded away entirely inside the flavor of a biscuit. We turn now to cinnamon, the sweet fragrant bark shaved from a far eastern tree and carried across half the world to reach a northern kitchen, so costly and so wrapped in mystery that the old writers told wild tales of how it was gathered from the nests of strange birds on unclimbable cliffs, tales that only raised its price and its wonder. In the household that could afford it, cinnamon was a warming, comforting medicine before it was ever a mere sweetness, taken in a cordial or a spiced posset for a chilled and feeble stomach, for a cold settled on the chest, and for the general strengthening of a body worn down by winter or illness. Its warmth thought to hearten the very spirits. A little of it turned an ordinary warm drink into a physic and a luxury at once. But cinnamon, too, has been carried all the way down from a guarded and fabled drug to a cheap brown dust shaken over a bun, and the warming cordial our forebears sipped so carefully against the cold has been forgotten as thoroughly as the birds' nest stories once told to explain its cost. Let us turn now to cloves, the small dark dried buds, sharp and hot and numbing, carried from the same distant seas and valued as highly. In the household they served the stomach and, above all, the aching tooth, for a single clove held against a throbbing tooth, or its pressed oil dabbed upon it, numbed the pain as few things could. And here, alone among all the market drugs, the old remedy survived almost unbroken into modern hands, for the numbing oil of cloves passed quietly from the medieval mouth into the dentist's own craft. Beyond the tooth, cloves were chewed to sweeten a foul breath and settle a queasy stomach, and pressed by the dozen into an orange to make the pomander, that clove-studded ball carried against the bad air thought to bring the plague. It was medicine, sweetener, and charm together, all in a spice dear enough to be counted out one bud at a time. Yet even the clove, whose tooth remedy outlasted nearly all the others, has become to most people only a note in a mulled wine and a stud in a baked ham. Its long and merciful service against the toothache remembered by scarcely anyone who tastes it. We turn now to pepper, the black grains that were, for the greater part of history, among the most precious things a household could own, so valuable that they were counted out like coin, hoarded, and even demanded as ransom and rent, a spice for which whole voyages were risked and whole fortunes made. In the medicine of the day, pepper was a powerful warming drug, taken in small amounts to rouse a cold and sluggish stomach, to warm a chilled body, to ease wind and griping, and to help preserve the very food. It seasoned in an age with no other way to keep it, so that its use at the table was itself a kind of daily physic. To spend pepper was to spend real wealth, and a well-filled pepper box was a sign of a prospering house. And here is the strangest forgetting of all, for pepper did not fall from use, but fell from price, tumbling from a guarded treasure to the commonest thing on every table, until the grains our forebears counted like silver and took carefully as medicine are ground, now without a thought, their old worth and their old physic alike quite unimaginable to the hand that turns the mill. To close the plants of the market stall, we turn to two of the dearest, and first to nutmeg, the hard fragrant seed, and its scarlet lacy covering, mace, brought from a few small far-off islands and worth, for a time, very nearly its weight in gold. So prized was it as a medicine that people carried their own nutmeg about with them, in a little box with a silver grater, to shave a fresh dusting into a warm drink wherever they went, for it was taken as a warming comfort for the stomach, a gentle bringer of sleep grated into a bedtime posset, and, above all, a guard held out against the plague, pressed to the nose and taken in the cordials against infection. A single nutmeg was a thing of real value, and battles and bargains were fought over the islands that grew them. It carried, too, a hidden strength that a later age came to treat with more caution, for taken in any quantity it clouded and troubled the mind, a fact told here only as history. The little box and the silver grater are gone, and the nutmeg our forebears carried against the plague and grated into their sleeping cup is now a faint, warm dust on a custard, its careful old physic wholly forgotten. And last of all the market plants, we turn to saffron, the costliest substance of the whole apothecary's shop, the dried scarlet threads plucked one by one from the heart of a small autumn crocus. So many thousands of flowers to the ounce that its price outrun even gold, and yet grown, for a golden while, right here in the fields of the drier East Country, around a town that took its very name from the crop. Saffron was a medicine of the heart, and the spirits above all, taken to gladden a heavy heart and drive off melancholy, to strengthen the stomach and the sight, and given in a warm posset against the measles and the fevers of childhood, believed to bring the rash out kindly and safely. So merry did it make the taker that an old phrase held a too cheerful person to have slept in a bag of saffron. To use it was to use liquid gold, a pinch kept for the gravest illness and the greatest feast alike. But the English crop dwindled and died away. The fields that grew it turned to other things, and saffron became once more a rare and foreign luxury, its long service as the golden cordial of the failing heart and the feverish child forgotten as completely as the fields that once grew it. Let us turn now, for the last small gathering of our evening, to the plants a household kept not to swallow or to bind to a wound at all, but simply to sweeten and to guard the very air of a room. In an age of earth and rush-strewn floors, of close-shuttered windows against the cold, of damp walls and smoking hearths, and no drains worth the name, the air of a house was itself a matter of health. For the bad air, the foul and heavy stink of a close room, was widely believed to carry sickness and even the plague upon it. And so these last plants were strewn underfoot, hung from the beams, laid among the linen, and burned upon the coals, to freshen the air, to drive out the fleas and moths and biting things, and to keep, it was hoped, the very breath of illness from the door. They are the gentlest use of all, and a fitting one to carry us down towards sleep. We begin with southernwood, silvery and feathery and sharply sweet, its soft grey-green foliage giving off, at the lightest brush, a clean lemon and camphor scent that clung to the hand and the sleeve. It was grown by the doorstep and along the path in cottage gardens without number, and its whole reputation was bound up with that keen protecting fragrance. Dried and hung in the linen press, and laid among the folded woolens, it kept the moths from the cloth through the long-stored months, and small bunches of it were carried to the long church service, both to keep a drowsing worshipper awake with its sharpness, and held to the face to guard against the fevers and the fleas that a crowded congregation carried. A weak infusion was given, carefully, for the worms that troubled children. But its tenderest use was none of these, for a sprig of it, called lad's love, was the shy country gift of a young man to the girl he favoured, pressed into her hand at the gate or worn in his coat, so that the plant was half medicine and half courtship. All of it has faded together, and southernwood, still soft and silver in a few old gardens, is kept now only for the memory of a scent, its moth-guarding and its fever-warding, and its shy old message alike forgotten. We turn now to sweet woodruff, low and delicate, its narrow leaves set in neat green ruffs like little wheels around the stem, carpeting the cool floor of the old beech wood and the shady corner of the garden with its small white starry flowers. Fresh upon the plant, it had scarcely any scent at all, and here lay its quiet marvel. For as it dried, it grew sweeter and sweeter, giving off at last the warm, gentle smell of new-mown hay and fresh-cut grass, a scent that deepened with age and lingered for months. And so it was gathered and dried in bunches, and hung about the house, and laid among the linen, and tucked into the leaves of books to sweeten them, strewn on the floors of the grand chamber and the church on a feast day, so that the crushed leaves breathed out their hay sweet air underfoot. Steeped fresh in wine, it made the cool fragrant cup of the springtime that the old people drank to welcome the May, and its infusion was taken as well for the liver, and its leaves laid to a wound. Yet the sweetened linen and the strewn floor and the May wine have all gone the way of the rush-strewn hall, and sweet woodruff spreads now, unregarded, as a pretty green carpet in a shady bed, its slow sweetening secret, and its 100 household uses forgotten. Let us turn now to lady's bedstraw, its froth of tiny, bright yellow flowers foaming across the dry summer bank, and the meadow with a soft, warm scent of honey, drying down to that same hay-sweet fragrance that made it, above all other plants, the herb of the mattress and the bed. Gathered and dried by the great armful, it was stuffed into the ticking of beds and pallets to make a sweet-smelling, springy, faintly flea-repelling filling, so that a whole household slept upon it, and an old and tender legend held that it was this very plant, sweet and clean, that lined the manga where the Holy Child was laid, giving it its gentle name. It had 2 further uses that kept it always wanted, for its flowering tops would curdle warm milk, and were used in place of rennet to set the cheese, colouring it a rich yellow as they did, and its roots yielded a red dye for cloth. A wash of the plant was used for tired, aching feet, and for burns and skin troubles besides. But beds are no longer stuffed with meadow hay, and cheese is set by other means, and ladies' bedstraw, once slept upon by half a country and pressed into its cheeses, is now only a yellow froth in the summer grass, its warm and useful life quite forgotten. We turn now to costmary, tall and pale and balsam-scented, its long soft leaves giving off a clean, sweet, minty balsam smell that made it a favorite for every purpose of sweetening and freshening. Grown in the cottage and close to a garden alike, it was strewn on floors and laid among the linen, and steeped in the brewing owl to clear and flavour it, which won it the country name of alacost, the cost or herb of the owl. But its most charming use, and the one that gave it its other name, the Bible leaf, was quieter still, for a single long fragrant leaf was pressed flat and kept as a scented bookmark in the family Bible and prayer book, both to mark the place and to be lifted out and smelled or even nibbled, to keep the mind awake and the spirits up through a long and drowsy sermon. Beyond its sweetness, it was a genuine medicine, its leaves taken for a weak stomach and a sluggish liver, and used by women in childbirth. Yet the strewn floor and the home-brewed ale and the long sermon have all passed away, and costmary, that sweet and useful leaf, is now among the rarest of the old cottage herbs, kept by a few who love the past, its balsam scent rising from no Bible and no ale at all. Let us turn now to sweet flag, or calamus, a tall reed-like plant of the pond margin and the slow river's edge, its narrow sword-shaped leaves and thick creeping root breathing out, when bruised or cut, a warm, sweet, spicy scent quite unlike anything else that grew in the cold, wet places it favored. It was that fragrance that made it prized, for its leaves and roots were the most treasured of all the plants strewn upon the floors of churches and great halls and grand chambers, crushed underfoot to fill the whole room with their sweet, warm smell, so costly and so cherished a rush that a great cardinal was scolded by his enemies for the extravagance of strewing his floors with it fresh and often. Beyond the floor, the aromatic root was chewed and taken for a weak and windy stomach, for indigestion and colic, and held against an aching tooth, and it was candied into a warm, spicy sweetmeat besides. It was luxury and medicine growing together in the mud of the waterside. But the strewn floor gave way to the board and the carpet, and the sweet root to other remedies, and sweet flag stands now unregarded at the water's edge, its warm fragrance rising for no one, its old place of honor on the floors of the great and the holy entirely forgotten. To close the plants of the household air, and with them the whole 100, we turn to fleabane, a modest daisy-like plant of the damp meadow, the ditch, and the marshy ground. Its ragged yellow flowers and its faintly sharp, resinous, not quite sweet scent, giving it a use written plainly in its very name. Gathered and dried and burned upon the coals, or simply hung in bunches about the bed and the room and strewn among the bedding. Its smoke and its scent drove out the fleas and the gnats and the biting midges that made a summer night in a low damp cottage a misery, fumigating and freshening a room at once, so that no other plant was more directly a guardian of a household's peace and rest. It had graver uses too, its astringent infusion taken for the loose and dangerous fluxes of summer and laid to wounds. It was, quite simply, the plant you burned to make a room fit to sleep in. And when the powders and the sprays of a later age took over the driving out of the fleas, fleabane lost its whole homely office at a stroke, and the plant, that once smoked 1,000 cottages clean enough for sleep sank back into the wet meadow, a nameless weed, the last of our 100, and among the most completely forgotten of them all. And there, gently, our 100 are gathered, and it is time to let them go. We have wandered a long way tonight, and there is no need to have followed every step of it. We began with the plants of fever, the feverfew and the willow and the meadowsweet, and moved on through the plants pressed to a wound, and the plants steeped for an aching belly and a winter cough, through the herbs kept for the heavy head and the restless mind, the women's plants and the children's plants, the plants of the skin and the bone, the small mercies for the eyes and the teeth, the kitchen herbs that were quietly also medicine, the free physic of the hedgerow, the costly powders carried from the ends of the earth, and these last, gentlest plants of all, kept only to sweeten the air of a sleeping room, 100 plants that once, 500 years ago, needed no explaining at all, that a child knew before letters and a household reached for without a second thought, and that have slipped, one by one, out of the common memory, until a knowledge that was once everyone's has become almost no one's. There is a small comfort in the slipping away, and it is this: not one of these plants has gone. Every one of them, the feverfew and the yarrow, the elder and the dandelion, the humble plantain trodden into the path, is still growing tonight, out there in the dark, along the hedges and the wet ditches and the sunny banks and the cracks in the trodden ground, exactly where it always grew. The knowledge faded, but the plants kept faith, patient and green and waiting, asking nothing, holding their old virtues quietly, whether anyone remembers them or not. And there is something restful in that thought, that the whole of this long-lost pharmacy is still there, unchanged, just beyond the window, needing only to be noticed. You do not need to remember any of it. That was never the purpose of this evening. The names may drift and blur and settle, now like leaves coming to rest on still water, and in the morning you may keep one or two, or none at all, and it will not matter in the least. Let them go. Let the feverfew and the meadowsweet, the lavender and the poppy, the elder and the saffron, loosen their hold and sink away into the soft dark with everything else the day has carried. Let your breathing slow. Let your shoulders come down and your hands fall open, and the small weight behind your eyes grow heavy and warm. There is nothing left to do tonight, and nothing at all left to remember. The 100 plants are gathered and set down. The basket by the door is full. The candle is burned low, and the long night ahead of you is entirely your own, unhurried, unbroken and safe. Sleep well. The quiet apothecary will be back soon with another quiet chapter. Somewhere out in the dark the hedgerows stand full of their old, patient medicine, breathing softly into the night air. And there is nothing now anywhere that you need to do but rest